Hey, all you golfers out there. Welcome back to another episode of the Golf 360 podcast. For any of us that have been around the game for any amount of time, we remember who Mr. Harvey Penick was. And you could probably look far and wide to find somebody who would disagree that Mr. Penick was probably one of the best teachers, coaches, instructors, whatever term you want to use, in the history of the game, if not the greatest of all time. And my guest today would know more about Mr. Penick than almost everybody out there because he was the lead instructor for the Penick Golf School for a number of years and ran that work very closely with Mr. Penick, got to pick his brain, learn from him, and just became great friends with him over the time that they spent together. My guest today is Bryan Gathright. And aside from his history with the Penick family and Mr. Penick himself, Bryan is also a top 100 coach, and he is presently in San Antonio, Texas, at the clubs at Cordillera Ranch. As you listen to the show, it's going to come across what a wonderful person he is. I'm sure that has a lot to do with why Mr. Penick selected him to run his academy and be their lead instructor. Bryan has some great stories, and he tells a bunch of them in today's show. He's got a very easy way about the way he goes about telling his stories with his southern drawl and just his personality being very laid back. And this was just a joy to talk to him and listen to him tell these stories. He works with players of all skill levels. He enjoys working with beginners just as much as he does with some of the best players in the world, as he has helped improve the games of all those people and everybody in between. He helped Jimmy Walker, who's a multi-winner on the PGA Tour and the PGA champion. He helped Nota Begay for a number of years. Nota's obviously very well known. He's a 4-time PGA Tour winner, President's Cup member, and a whole slew of other people in between. He tends to focus now on a lot of up-and-coming golf stars in the amateur ranks, and is having phenomenal success with a lot of his students, in particular last year, where they have Texas state champions, state amateur champions, mid-amateur champions, a whole slew of great things that he's doing with he and all his students. So not only that, again, Bryan tells a bunch of stories about Mr. Penick, about some of his tour players, some of his amateurs. And I really think you're going to enjoy listening to this. We talked for probably a good 2.5 hours, and I could have sat there and listened to Bryan talk for another 2.5 and not even realize how long we were there. So can't wait to catch up with him and have a beer as we discuss meeting sometime in the near future. But until that happens, I really hope you enjoy this show as much as I did talking to him. And as always, please sit back, relax, give a big Golf 360 welcome to my guest today, top 100 coach, Mr. Bryan Gathright. What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Golf 360 podcast. I'm the host, Pete Popovich. So you may be asking yourself, what is Golf 360? And Golf 360 is a show that was designed to introduce you to people associated with the game of golf to help you improve not only at your game, but also your life. Almost all of our guests are from within the industry in some way, shape, or form, but some of the guests we have are from outside the industry, and it mainly revolves around the business world with a few others scattered in here and there. Now, all of the guests that we have a few things in common. One, they all were highly successful and accomplished in their field. Two, each has something to pass along that will help you in your game and your life. And three, they were all more than willing to give back by passing along the things that they use to help them in their career, and even some of the mistakes that they made so that others don't make them in their journey. So I hope you find listening to them as enjoyable as I did interviewing them, and that each and every one of you benefits from the information that they so willingly and graciously pass along. Hey everybody, I want to give a big shout out to a new sponsor of the Golf 360 podcast, and that's Affinity Wealth Management Group. We all work exceptionally hard for our money, and none of us can afford to let that fall into the dark abyss of the big box financial service firms and their jack of all trades and master of none mantra, which basically means you become a number within a cookie cutter model that's also often accompanied by massive fees. Your future deserves more than average returns and little attention. At Affinity Wealth Management, they ensure that your financial goals receive highly individualized, tailored attention from experts, not just advisors, who are in the industry to be great and not average. As a client of Affinity Wealth, you receive a customized solution to your customized life, keeping in mind your family's financial situation, values, and risk tolerance. Call Affinity Wealth today for a no-cost consultation with one of their experts at 724-754-8200. Again, that's 724-754-8200. Or you can also check them out on the web at www.affinitywealthmg.com. That's AFFINITYWEALTHMG.com. This podcast is brought to you in part by Just Thrive Probiotic. You may be surprised to learn that your digestive system is the key to creating and maintaining the quality of your physical, mental, and emotional health, and it's one of the body's most essential systems. That's why the majority of nutritionists today highly recommend probiotics as an indispensable nutritional supplement. As a discriminating consumer, you've probably been searching for a probiotic that is proven, potent, and effective, and you found it. Just Thrive is your best choice for maintaining a healthy lifestyle. Just Thrive Probiotic captures the power of hundreds of thousands of years of nature's design with a specialized bacillus strain formulation that guarantees survivability through the stomach and upper digestive system. Supports optimum gut health, digestive health, immune health, and delivers antioxidants. Great for adults, kids, and the whole family. Use promo code GOLF360 at www.thriveprobiotic.com for 10% off your order. All right, I'm here with Mr. Bryan Gathright, top 100 coach. Bryan, pleasure to have you on Golf 360 podcast.
Well, it's my pleasure, Pete. Thank you so much for having me on.
Did you get to watch much of that Super Bowl yesterday?
You know, my wife is prior military, so I only saw bits and pieces. Okay, we were huge football fans, and we've kind of taken a step back with everything that's going on.
Right. I think that's the second football game I've watched in 2 years, and both of them being the Super Bowl.
Yeah, the interesting thing to see. What can you say about Tom Brady that hadn't already been said, but just incredible. The guy's 43 years old, and there's no doubt he's the greatest of all time.
No kidding.
It doesn't get any better than that.
I think it was Trevor Immelman that had a post on Twitter, Instagram, he's somewhere, and he was talking that the match, that they had this year. Was it Phil and Barkley versus Brady and somebody? I can't remember who it was, or was it whatever match it was when Brady played?
Right.
And he said, it was raining that day, and they look out in the parking lot or somewhere, and Brady's out there and it's raining. He's doing sprints and stretches. And I think Barkley asked him, I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm getting ready to win another Super Bowl." So it's like he never stops. He's always doing something.
Well, and, to see him go, it's one thing you can look back at all of the success he had in New England and the great coaching, the great players that he had around him and everything. But then to go to a completely different team, a team that, 7-9 last year. And the guy's he knows how to win. And you can't say enough about that. And that's in any sport. The greatest always figure out a way to get it done. And, to kind of take it into a golf mode, you see players. I think back, I've been so fortunate in my career in being around all different types of athletes, but let's go back a little bit to Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was a drive and shoot scorer when he came in the league, but by the end of his career, when he was still winning championships, he became a step back jump shooter. And he still had all the game and all the moves, but he figured out how to play to his strengths, and his strengths changed. And Brady doesn't have the cannon that he had, 10, 15 years ago. I heard today that I believe I was watching the news just a little bit ago, and they said that Patrick Mahomes' parents are a year older than Tom Brady, and he was 6 when Brady played in his first Super Bowl.
It's amazing.
So it speaks volumes. But you watch what Tom has done. He's figured out how to pick you apart with his mind, and then you see players, what Tiger did at Augusta, when he, to win Augusta, and that back nine was unbelievable as far as from a strategic and technical perspective. He just kept the ball where it was supposed to be, and it seems like all the great players figure out how to do that as their game evolves, and you certainly saw it with Jack and many others in the game of golf. But it's just I don't care whether you're a football fan, a sports fan, or any kind of fan. My hat's off to him. You don't have to like him, but I can assure you one thing about it: you got to respect the man, because that was something special.
No kidding. And with all the things going on in the country, one of them being kids out of school, and I've told a number of friends and anyone else that would bear to listen to me for more than a few minutes, I say, it's not all that bad that they're not in school, because if they're outside and they're running, playing, living life, then they're learning life skills, and probably most important is how to problem solve, which is huge in today's world. You don't need to memorize anything anymore like you did back in the 30, 40 or more years ago. Now it's just like, okay, how do you figure something out? To your point on what Brady's done, he's adapted, Jordan adapted, all the best seem to find a way to do it. And to me, that illustrates what great problem solvers they are.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's one of the great things that we can teach our children. And certainly, I think back, I'll share a quick story about my own son, who's a fantastic go-to fitness trainer and has really become a huge asset to me in my business, and teaching me so much about the biomechanics and functional movement and things that have helped me. But I'll go back. He may not appreciate this, but I'll take him back to a time when he was in high school, and as a parent, at that point in time, I was a single parent with custody of him, and I heard, I heard the phone ring, and I look down and I see, and it's the school, and that always startles you a little bit when the school's calling you, and it was interestingly is sports medicine. He took a sports medicine class, then an advanced sports medicine class in high school here in San Antonio, and it was his advanced sports medicine teacher. And he told me, he said, Mr. Gathright, he said, I know people get a lot of calls, about their children and everything. And I'm just thinking to myself, oh gosh, what's he done? And he said, I just wanted to tell you, in all the 17 years I've taught this class, your son has absolutely been the best student I've ever had. He's involved. He enjoys it. You can tell he's interested. He asks great questions. And I just wanted to tell you, because sometimes you don't hear that as a parent. I was beaming from ear, grinning from ear to ear, and had that beam. And then about 2:00, I got another call from his school, and it was his English teacher. And her comment was, I don't know what I'm going to do with your son. He's smart enough to do the work. He just doesn't want to do it. And so that night, I'm trying to explain this life lesson of, sports med and English. And I won't quote some of the books that he did, but he asked me, he said, have you ever tried to read this stuff? And it's interesting, because the problem solving that you're talking about, he later in life, little did we know, he's 28 now. That was about 12 years ago, that he did figure out his passion, and he's tremendous with solving things in the golf swing through functional movement. And obviously he's kind of grown up around the game. He's been around it since he was old enough to walk. So, but it is going back to what you said, the ability for for young people to learn to problem solve and not just memorize what's in textbooks. That to me is what makes people great.
It always amazes me when somebody finds something that interests them, how they can dive in and they're completely different than they are in another realm. Your son's case being the English versus the medical
Sports
stuff, that his
medicine
sports
and
medicine.
training, yeah.
And I'll never forget when I first moved to Hilton Head. Rick Berry was a top 100 teacher. Back then they had Rick was at the Plantation Club and Don Trahan was at Harbortown. And Rick used to do a complimentary clinic every Tuesday night. One of the local realtors who was a friend of his would put it on, and he'd provide any drink that anybody wanted. And then he would do a sales pitch, and then Rick would do the clinic. But I wasn't here long, and I was loved teaching even at a young age, so I would go watch these guys teach or give clinics. And I remember there was an older gentleman there, and he had to be in his late 70s, and I don't know what disease he had, but he would be sitting there, and all of a sudden his arm would just flail out. He would move uncontrollably, or his leg would kick out, and he would shake. And so as the clinic goes on, Rick says, "Would anybody like to come up and hit a couple balls and go over what I just discussed?" And the guy raised his hand, and he went up there, and he was shaking and twitching and everything else. And as soon as his hands wrapped around the grip, everything stopped. And
Wow.
He was calm as could be. And he made a swing, and you'd never know that anything was wrong with him. And probably within the count of 2 into his finish, as soon as he started to lower the club, he started his shaking again. So I always found that fascinating, that there's something there that allows the mind to focus, whether it's at a level of a teenager, a baby, or an older person, maybe with some sort of neurological problem, that it can just go to a whole new level. It's always fascinated me. Probably why I like the teaching.
Extremely fascinating, and what an incredible story. And that's what's so great about golf. And I just can't stress how blessed and how fortunate I've been in my career. I've been around so many of the great teachers and great players, and it really it's just incredible to see what golf's done for me, coming from a town of about 2,800 people and growing up on a 9-hole golf course in Central Texas.
You have had a very long and distinguished career, and I'd like to get into a lot of it tonight. Has it always been in the teaching and coaching, or did you start out in the clubhouse or in the pro shop?
Well, I've got a little bit of a kind of a strange background. I actually played 2 years. I was a place kicker for 2 years in junior college, and my junior college football coaches, both the head coach, who still has actually retired in San Antonio, and just a phenomenal guy, Harold Hearn, and actually Coach Hearn, I've talked to him many times and told him what just an incredible job he did for me, not knowing at that point in time, you're 18, 19 years old and you're playing a team sport, and we were blessed. We had some great players. I mean, we won the conference championship twice. We had 2 guys on our team that ended up being first round draft picks, a few years later in the NFL, and had good careers there. And it was just incredible. But I learned how to communicate so very well with him, and how that you couldn't treat everybody exactly the same. And that's somewhat strange as in a team sport. You would think that, well, you got to, treat everybody the same. And he absolutely didn't do that. He knew the kids that needed pushing, and he also knew the kids that needed praising. And what an incredible ability that Harold Hearn had to do that. He just knew what to say when. And the thing that I've always remembered, and I've always hugged his neck and told him every time I see him how much I appreciate it, is that he made us believe that we were better than we were. And, for a coach, that's the greatest gift you can give any player in any sport. I guarantee you, Tom Brady didn't have a doubt when he went on that field last night. And certainly, when you're working with great athletes and great players, you want them to always go on the field or on the course or wherever they're performing with the utmost in confidence and knowing that they belong. And I really learned that from him. So that was such a great thing. And, you go through those points in life. So I started in football, and then my last semester there, I had a couple of offers. I could have gone to West Virginia or Boston College as a place kicker. This was, back in the 70s. And growing up about 40 in Teague, Texas, about 45 miles south of Corsicana, where Navarro College was, where I was playing, those two places were, quite honestly seemed like the end of the earth. And Coach Hearn was starting a golf team, and I'd always played golf with them during the off season. And as soon as we'd get through with off season workout, we'd go to the club and hit balls and practice and play and do those things. And he said, as a place kicker, it's not that necessary for you to be there in spring ball. Why don't you stay here and play golf? And I'm going to start a golf team. And he knew I'd played a bunch. Well, lo and behold, I made all conference in golf. I ended up getting a golf scholarship to Lamar University and really kind of switched sports. And then I graduated in 81 from Lamar, and then actually had the good fortune to turn pro and played for 5 years and had a modestly successful career. Played the mini tours in 82 and 83 with a slight withdrawal from it. I had a rotator cuff surgery in early 1983 that caused me to miss several months. But after getting back from that, I was fortunate enough. The PGA Tour had just introduced a tournament Players Series tour, which has now become the Korn Ferry Tour. But then they played that in 84 and 85. For 2 years, and you could actually Monday qualify for those. So I was fortunate. I got to Monday qualify. I got to play in a few of those events. And then in 1986, they didn't have near the schedule in 84 and 85 they do now. I think they had like 10 events, and I got to play quite a few of them. And then in 86, I played the Asian Tour, and I figured out I was a good player. I figured out real quickly I wasn't a great player. So I had the opportunity then to go to work at Oak Tree Golf Club in 1987 and was there in 87 and 88 for the 88 PGA Championship that Jeff Sluman won.
Mm-hmm.
And then shortly thereafter, well, that was in the heyday of Landmark, which had, Oak Tree Country Club, Palm Beach Polo, Kiowa Island, PGA West, La Quinta, Mission Hills, Carmel Valley Ranch. There were so many of the Oak Tree clubs, and they transferred me to PGA West to the private courses, and I was there for about 3.5 years, and then I got two huge breaks in my life. One of our members, a gentleman named Boyd Jeffries, actually hired me to move to Aspen, Colorado, to run a huge charity junior golf foundation. And my two jobs were really to run the junior golf program, which it grew from about 60 kids the first year I was there till the last year I was there. We had 540 kids in the program. I had 70 volunteer instructors. And then my other job was to run a gigantic charity tournament that one year we had 10 of the top 13 money winners on the tour, plus all kinds of celebrities that played in the event from and then Glenn Fry, the former lead of the Eagles, he and Don Henley with the Eagles. Glenn played the music for the event, and then later on I actually talked Glenn into becoming the name on the event, and we raised several $1 million for charity over the years, and I stayed involved with that event until Glenn finally figured out I think the last year that we did it, he ended up playing the music for 30 different tour players, celebrity pro-ams, and he said he couldn't afford to travel anymore. He had been gone so much with that, but we'd set up a foundation and had enough money accumulated then to really do some wonderful things and continue to keep the charity up and operating. And then from there, I actually had an assistant that had worked at Austin Country Club for Harvey Penick when she was in school there. Susan Watkins, who later became the head women's golf coach at the University of Texas. But Susan mentioned to me that Harvey was getting ready to team with Golfsmith and start a golf academy. And she said, Bryan, you should talk to him about it, because I think it'd be a great opportunity for you. And I think you'd be perfect for that role. And lo and behold, I reached out to him, got an interview, went down, met Mr. Penick, and the break of a lifetime as a teacher, because to get an opportunity to work side by side with arguably one of the 2 or 3 best instructors in the history of the game of golf worldwide, I can't say more than that. I mean, for a young football player, it's like getting to go work with Tom Brady for a few years. Mm-hmm. I mean, just incredible. And in my case, I was very fortunate then that he took such a genuine interest in me.
Did you work at Austin Country Club, or did you work directly with the school, with the academy?
With the school, we actually had a teaching facility that we did there at the school. Now, here's the interesting thing about Austin Country Club and the ties to Harvey Penick. So I told you I grew up in Teague, Texas, on a 9-hole golf course, which was then Freestone Country Club's now Tri-County Country Club at the Vineyards, and it's now an 18-hole course. But I grew up with a gentleman who now we have been friends for 56 years. Literally, we grew up at 6-7 years of age playing golf with each other, playing Little League and different sports against each other. Dale Morgan was from Fairfield, Texas, and Freestone Country Club was halfway between Teague and Fairfield, and they were only 9 miles apart. And a bunch of his parents, my parents, and many others around, you could get a FHA loan to build rural recreation, and a bunch of the businessmen there in the 2 towns went to the FHA, applied, got a small business loan, and built this little 9-hole. It's to say it was a 9-hole golf course. It had great greens and basically it had a lot of length, which was unusual for that. So for small courses like that, but we grew up playing there together and got to be great friends. Well, to tell you how small the world is and how things go full circle, and for any listeners out there that either that are young men or women, or the parents that have young men or women, it is possible, because when I tell you this, it's almost astonishing. I grew up from there playing golf and playing every other sport just because it was a small town, to literally starting and being the director of instruction for one of the icons in the history of the game of golf, in Harvey Penick. And my best friend growing up, Dale Morgan, is the only person to be director of golf at Austin Country Club not named Penick since 1927. And the odds of the two of us, growing up on a 9-hole golf course in Central Texas and then having ties to a legend like Harvey in the state of Texas, and then golf in general, we've talked about it so many times that, you couldn't write that story when we were kids, because that wouldn't be something anyone would believe would be possible. And we've shared so many memories and so many incredible times, both with Harvey and then with each other and talking about it. And Dale's just an incredible man. Now, I always tell people, if you want to know how great a guy Dale Morgan is, well, Dale Morgan graduated from Texas A&M University, and he's the director of golf at Austin Country Club. And I can assure you, those two things would almost always be mutually exclusive of each other. So he's a great guy and a great friend, and someone that we both to have had that tie with Harvey. And then Dale took over for Tinsley, who was Harvey's son, who was the director of golf after Harvey retired, until Dale became director of instruction. It's just an incredible story. And one of the things with Harvey, I would be remiss if I didn't tell this story, and I'm going to do my best to get through it, because it's something that's not easy, but it explains what kind of a man he was. So, my last conversation with him, just a few days before he passed away. He was in hospice care at his house there on the 15th tee at Austin Country Club. And I literally knew it was going to be the last time that I would get an opportunity to spend any time with him. And we knew he had pneumonia. He wasn't doing well, and pretty much knew he wasn't going to make it. So I went by to pay my respects with him and talk with him and just tell him, not that thank you is anything you can even say for what he had done for me, but to really to do that. And the deal was you were supposed to spend about 5 minutes max. He had a hospital bed moved into the house there, and Helen, his wife, kind of kept watch over him like a watchdog. And there was a nurse that was usually there, and especially in the evenings and everything. I went by one afternoon, and I'd been in there probably 10 minutes, and Mrs. Penick came to the door, and she kind of cleared her throat, and I stood up and said, "Miss Penick, I know I'm leaving," and he kind of nodded, but moved for me to sit back down for a minute. He wanted to tell me something else, and it's going on now probably about 20 minutes, and I know I've overstayed my welcome. And she comes to the door, and she very distinctly clears her throat. I mean, it's like, oh, but you need to get out of here. And he sat up in his bed, grabbed my left forearm with his right hand, looked at her, and just as sternly as he could say to both of us, he looked at her and he said, "I'm 90 years old." And then he turned and looked at me and he said, "You sit down." And we literally spent probably another hour and a half to 2 hours talking. And it was one of the most incredible things, because about an hour into the conversation, he looked at me and he said, "Will you promise me something?" And of course, at that point in time, I mean, number one, I would have promised him anything possible that I could ever do, no matter what. But I said, "Well, sure, Harvey, but what do you want me to promise you?" And he goes, "No," he goes, "you look me in the eye and you give me your word." And I said, "Well, what?" I was kind of teasing with him at this point in time. I said, "Well, why don't you tell me what you want me to give you your word about to make sure I do it?" And he goes, "No, you give me your word that you will do this." And I said, "Okay, I will give you my word." And he goes, "No, I'm serious." And he reached out and held my hand, and I did. And I said, "Of course I will, whatever you ask." And he said, "Bryan," he said, "you don't have to do it immediately." He said, "But I want you to promise me after I'm gone and an appropriate time has passed," he said, "I want you to go do your own deal." He said, "You've earned that right." And he said, "I know you'd take care of these schools and everything would be run exactly as I want if you stayed here." He said, "And that'd be the most unfair thing I could ever ask of you." He said, "You promise me that you'll go do your own deal." And the selflessness of that in that particular point in time, I can't tell you, Pete, how hard it would have been for me to have ever left there had he not had the foresight to do that for me, because I would have always felt like I was letting him down, and what an incredible human being to be that far ahead at that point in time in his life. I mean, to have thought of that, that's what a man he was. I mean, and anyone that ever, Ben Crenshaw is a dear friend, and I know Ben can tell you hundreds and hundreds of stories of the time he spent, and Tom Kite and Kathy Whitworth and so many others. But I can't even describe how you would think to do that in the shape he was in at that point in time, and the way he did it, and everything. It's just it was life changing for me. And from there, I shortly thereafter ended up at La Cantera in San Antonio, and started a gentleman named Buddy Cook, who was at the Vintage Club when I was at PGA West. He and I were friends, and he and a gentleman named General McDermott, who was the chairman of the board of USAA Insurance, had this vision to create La Cantera, which turned into a 36-hole resort and now a big shopping development and everything that they formed there. But Buddy was managing the golf course at the time, and I ran into him at the PGA show in Orlando, and he told me he wanted me to come talk to him when we got back, and lo and behold, I did, and he hired me, and it was quite funny when I started that in San Antonio. There was no one doing full-time golf instruction, much less in a golf academy or anything. I mean, you could get lessons at clubs and at different courses and stuff, but there was no one doing what we look at today as the instruction industry. And Buddy's now a member at Cordillera, where I am, and at the clubs of Cordillera Ranch out in Bernie. And he and I've laughed about it a number of times, going, Buddy's kind of a character, and he and I both said, well, we've still got him fooled, because here we are 25, 26 years later now since that point. And, I'm still going teaching, and of course the industry's changed so much during that time, but what a remarkable opportunity to get to actually kind of start that business in San Antonio. And I've literally kind of found home here. I've moved 3 different times since then in San Antonio, but the point being, I'm still in the area, and I love being in Texas. I love the lifestyle here, and it's just a real laid back atmosphere, and it's a good fit for me personally.
When you worked for Mr. Penick, what were some of the most important things that he taught you, whether it's among coaching or being a good human being?
There's so many things, but a few things stand out. First and foremost, his passion for helping others was contagious. I mean, you could not be around the man and not know that there's nothing he wouldn't do to help a pupil. And I take pride in the fact that I was kind of raised that way. My mom and dad were big on instilling that into me as a young man. And my mom was kind of an athlete and the enforcer. My dad had played college football. My mom, I can remember watching my mom play fast pitch softball, and she was a pitcher. And when I was in the 6th grade, we challenged our parents to a softball game. We were feeling our oats a little bit, and she came out and pitched the first 3 innings and struck out the side in every inning, and everybody was mad at me because my mom struck him out. So we kind of got that athletic work ethic there, but Harvey had such a passion for making people better, for helping people, for in the kindest, most gentle way, yet he had an incredible sense of humor, incredibly sarcastic, that doesn't really come through in his books and things, but just he would say things sometimes that I would literally crack up when we were talking to a group, and he'd cut his eyes to me, knowing that I might have been the only one in the room that really got it, because everyone else was kind of hanging on every word. But
what would be an example?
He would tell a specific example. One of the only times I ever heard him kind of get on a person in a room. I'm going to share 2 stories with you. There's one that's incredible from a teaching standpoint, and this one, we had a man that was 72 years old, and I regretfully cannot remember his name. He was attending the school, and Harvey came out and spoke at every single school we had as long as his health held up. He was there at every one. He'd come out and have lunch, and then we'd set up a stage there at the teaching facility, and we'd have everyone in, and they'd ask questions. And, he'd spend an hour and a half, 2 hours talking to every group every single time. And we had this gentleman that was 72, and he had raised his hand, and he said, Mr. Penick, he goes, I'm 72, and my wife passed away recently. And he said, I've never played golf. I've kind of grown up farming. And he said, a bunch of my buddies have talked me into coming to this school because they think I ought to learn to play golf. And he was asking me basically, am I too old to learn? And Harvey looked over at me and shook his head. And this was the only time I ever heard him kind of chastise a pupil. And he looked at him and he goes, sir, he goes, he said, first off, you're a young man. I'm 89. And I remember he was 89 at the time. He goes, I'm 89 years old. Don't tell me about how old you are at 72. Okay. And he said, secondly, he said, that's the dumbest question anybody's ever asked me in my life. And he said, and then he went on to tell the man, he goes, you need this more than anything, and what it would do for him to spend time with his friends, to get his mind off of losing his lifelong partner, and just all of the great things that golf could do. But he was so that way, and then his sarcasm came through in a story that's in his books. But I asked Sandra Palmer this. Sandra had won the U.S. Women's Open and the following year it was at Oakmont, and it was in the mid 70s, and it's either 74 and 75 or 73 and 74. And I should know that. And it's been a number of years since I told the story, but we could go back and look it up. But Sandra called Harvey on Wednesday night from Pittsburgh and asked, to speak to him, asked Helen. Helen answered and said, could she speak to Harvey? And she said, of course. And Sandra told me this. She said, I was in tears. She said, I'd played 3 straight days of practice rounds. She said, every putt I hit was 5, 6, 8 feet past the hole. She said, it's the fastest greens I'd ever been on in my life. And she asked Harvey, she said, Harvey got on the phone and she said, Harvey, what do I do tomorrow? She said, every putt I've hit is run by the hole. And she said he paused for, about 15 seconds. She said it seemed like an eternity to her. And then he said, Sandra, I don't think I'd hit it quite so hard tomorrow. and she said she kept waiting on him to say something, and then she realized that was his answer, was I don't think I would hit it so hard tomorrow. And she kind of laughed, and then he said, Sandra, you're the defending U.S. Open champion. You don't have a single thing to prove. Go out there tomorrow, try to be a little bit softer with your putts. You have nothing to prove. You're the defending Open champion. You go enjoy competing tomorrow. And what great advice. And honestly, how many of us try to make it more complex than that?
Especially in today's world.
Oh, it's unbelievable. And if you told someone that today, they'd probably think it was a joke. But to hear Sandra's version of that and to hear it was exactly as a player what she needed to hear. She didn't need technique. She needed something she could take with her. And the not hit it so hard was the relaxing part of it, but then the psychological part that he was so brilliant with, to be able to come back and say, you have nothing to prove. Your name's on the trophy. You don't have to you don't have to be special. Just go do what you're good at. And that's such good advice for anyone playing this game. And one other story that I'd love to share with you. We had a gentleman, and Harvey was, for anyone out there that played offensive line or defensive line, and since we kind of started the visit tonight and talking about football, someone that's large-chested, big shoulders, big upper body. Harvey was the king of, if the left heel or the lead heel for a player came up, let it. He always used to say left heel because we didn't adopt the lead and the trail side until the last few years. But he felt like that it was fine for that lead foot to come off the ground a little to help bigger upper body players turn. And so anyway, long story short, I had one of the instructors came over to me. We had a real big school going, and one of the instructors came over to me and said, hey, can you watch this guy a little bit? And it was the first day of the school. He said, I'm having the hardest time. He's just stacking on his left leg. He can't get off his lead side. And, he's just digging holes out here, and he's reversing out and hitting it terribly. And I went over and watched him for just a few minutes, but it was right before lunch. And I said, sir, I said, we always try to bring up a pupil or two. I said, would you be willing to come up, on stage with Harvey in a little bit? I'd like to hear what he would tell you. And we're in this real long room, probably 50 people in the room at the time, bunch of instructors, everyone kind of hanging on each word he says, and we're all sitting there and they're asking questions. And I told Harvey, I said, hey, I want to bring this gentleman up. And in the back of the room is all glass where the doors are. And so if you can picture this, he's up on the stage, long, narrow room, glass at the very back of the room, chairs all, seated, and he's above the chairs. And we've got this gentleman standing there facing him in the middle of the stage. So to his right, him being a right-handed player, would be the back of the room and the back door. And Harvey asked him to let his heel come off the ground and try to take it back. And his weight just kind of loaded into his left foot and still stayed on his lead side. He tried 2 or 3 different things. He got me to stand over there, tried to get him to turn and shake hands with me. And it still just, nothing was really working. And you could see Harvey was kind of thinking through things. And Pete, this was the most incredible thing I've witnessed to this day in teaching golf. After about 3 or 4 different things, probably been 2 or 3 minutes, we'd tried this, we'd tried that. The guy is in his posture and he's got the club in his hand. He's set up to make a backswing. And Harvey just yells out and waves to the back of the room, goes, hey, how are you today? And the gentleman holding the club turned to look and kind of turned to his right with the club. And he said, freeze, don't move. There was no one there. That was his way of getting that gentleman to turn and look. And I'm telling you, it was one of the most ingenious things I've ever witnessed in teaching. And to this day, I guarantee you that guy remembers that story, because he then was able to go outside. He had something he could relate to. And to make it that simple, boy, I'll tell you what, there are a lot of my colleagues, and even myself included, I think that I don't know that we have the ability to simplify it in today's world like that. And what an ingenious thing that he was able to do there.
So would you say that the greatest thing that he taught you was his ability to relay, or not even relay, but take the information that was in his head and make it applicable to the person given that situation and time?
100%. And that was one of the things that I think was the most incredible thing about him is he had a way to say so much in the fewest amount of words possible and the simplest way possible. And I really pride myself in that as a teacher. I try to keep it so incredibly simple, if at all possible, and really work to relay a message. I get teased a lot by a lot of players I've taught for a long time, because I constantly ask them what something feels like. I'm a big fanatic about, as a player, I want you to have a feeling, because I truly feel that under the competition and pressure of competing at a high level, it's super important to be able to feel things versus having to mechanically think through things in the heat of the moment. So I genuinely learned that. And then to share, I was having lunch with Ben Crenshaw not too many months after Harvey had passed away, and we were in Austin, just around the corner from his office, and having lunch, and we were just sharing stories. And one of the things that Ben asked me, he goes, Bryan, he goes, we both were so fortunate, and we spent so much time around him, and obviously made nowhere near the amount of time that Ben did, but I was fortunate to spend hundreds of hours with the man in the 3 years that I was there. And the interesting thing with it was, Ben asked me, he said, so tell me something you learned from him that's not in the books, that you feel like, what's the most significant thing that you learned as a teacher that maybe you didn't know, or maybe that you didn't, you hadn't heard that way or anything? And I said, Ben, I said, it's really simple. I said, and I've thought about it often. I said, he taught me, first off, Harvey Penick studied and knew more about the grip than any 10 instructors in the history of the game, and how it related to the club face and how it related to the golf swing and the path of the swing and everything that goes on in the golf swing. And I asked him one day, I said, Harvey, I said, I feel like sometimes players fool you with their grip. I said, it looks good, but I know it's not. I said, is there a way to really judge when a guy's got a great grip or a girl has a great grip and know that you're right? And he goes, oh, absolutely. He said, watch their forearms, not their hands when they place their hands on the club. And Ben looked at me when I said that, and he goes, I never heard him mention that a time in my life. And I said, Ben, I said, interestingly, he told me you look like you were born with a club in your hand. He said, you grip the club exactly the way he loved for players to grip the golf club. And we finished lunch, walked back to the office, and first thing, of course, Ben does when we walk in his office, he walks over in the corner, picks up a golf club, puts his hands on it, and he starts laughing because how I had described this. And what Harvey meant by that was he really wanted your arms to be in a natural hanging state as you placed your hands on the club. He hated to see twisting and milking of the grip, as he called it. He never wanted your hands moving on that club. He knew that twisting caused tension, caused calluses. He would look at your golf glove. He would look at your hands before every lesson to see if you were getting calluses in different places. But when Ben picked up that club and did that, we both just sat there and laughed. And what Ben knew, and this is where it was, as he mentioned, classic Harvey. He said, well, I understand now. He said, I did it the way he liked, so he was never, ever going to make me even aware of it. And that was Harvey to a T. You're talking about, someone that worked with him his entire life, and he had never mentioned that to Ben because Ben gripped it exactly how he wanted him to, so he didn't want him thinking about it. So he just wouldn't talk to him about it.
That's funny because I used to go work with Jack Lumpkin a little bit on my swing, and at the time I had a weak left hand. I'm right-handed, and my lead hand was left. Right. And he was telling me you got to get it stronger, and I don't know what I asked him, but he said because he was good friends with Chuck Cook,
right?
And he said Chuck went to Harvey Penick one time because he was hitting hooks with his driver, and he's hitting balls for what seemed like eternity, but it was about 15 minutes. He said Mr. Penick was just standing there watching. He didn't say a word, and finally Chuck stops and looks back at him and says, "What do you think?" And he says, I want you to take a three-knuckle left-handed grip. And Chuck says Jack tells the story, he said, Chuck says he's thinking, well, three-knuckle grip, if I do that, I'm going to hit a bigger hook. So he says, Mr. Penick, I don't think you understand. I'm struggling with hooks. And he says back to him, he says, no, Chuck, I don't think you understand. I want you to take a three-knuckle grip. And
that was classic Harvey.
Right, because he knew that his left hand was breaking down, and at that stronger grip, he would never, the face would never roll over. He'd hold it off.
Exactly. And so two things I want to share with you. We'll talk a little instruction on that. First and foremost,
I don't want to cut you off, but Jack said, and Chuck's been one of the best drivers of the golf ball ever since then.
Oh, absolutely. And Chuck's a dear friend, by the way. I'd love if you're a teacher in the state of Texas and you don't think that Chuck Cook is very special, well, you probably need to relocate to a different state because he is an incredible guy and a great player, by the way, as well. Mm-hmm. Chuck's a wonderful player. But what I was going to tell you in talking about that from an instruction point of view, Harvey was adamant that the left hand controlled the path of the golf club, and the left hand, left side, and the right hand was more responsible for face angle. So I can't tell you how many times I've done the same exact thing where there's a young man named Trey Bosco, who's a freshman at Baylor, and I'm proud to say is the current Texas State amateur champion. Trey came to me at the request of a young man named Johnny Kiefer, who's a wonderful player this year as a sophomore at Baylor and just won a tournament recently and made honorable mention All-American as a freshman. And Johnny had caddied for Trey in the Merido junior tournament up in Dallas this a little over, last summer back in May. And had a super weak grip, was hitting a lot of pushes, a lot of just push hooks and all over the place. And he came to see me and I immediately, he had one of the weakest left-hand grips of anybody I've ever seen. And I cranked it over and he looked at me and I said, look, I don't care if you hook it, you're going to figure out how to stabilize that face with that strong left hand. And bless his heart, he hooked it off the planet for a week because he was or for a month, because he was so far under the plane line and it'd come in under and he'd flip it and it'd come in under and he'd flip it. And he'd call me and then he'd come see me. And I saw him 4 or 5 times in a matter of about 6 weeks. And lo and behold, it clicked. And when it did, some wonderful things happened. And as I said, I'm proud to say he's now the Texas State Amateur Champion that he won right after graduating from high school. So that's a pretty special thing. But again, one of those stories. And Hal Sutton, when Hal graduated, and Hal actually told me this story himself, when he graduated from Centenary in 1980, his dad had sent Hal to see instructors all over the country, and he sent Hal down to see Harvey. And same kind of deal where he watched him hit a bunch of balls, didn't say much. And finally, after they got done, Hal didn't really share exactly what all they worked on, but he said, Mr. Penick, can I ask you a question? And now keep in mind, this is 1980. And Harvey, of course, said, oh, of course, young man, anything. What do you want to know? And he goes, well, my dad sent me to instructors all over the country. And he said, you're the first one that didn't say anything about my real strong left-hand grip. And Harvey kind of grinned and looked at him, and this some of that sarcasm that comes out. He goes, son, don't you change that left hand. They'll all have a strong left hand in 10 years.
He's right.
But he was absolutely right. And I've been asked, Pete, many times, because Harvey was very simple, and I get asked this question a lot in interviews and different things, is what would Harvey have done in today's technological world? And I will tell you, he would have embraced it. And I think back, because video was just coming on the scene, back in the early 90s when we started his golf schools. And I asked him one day, I said, what do we need to do on video? And he kind of shook his head and he goes, I know we need to do it, he said, because that's kind of the way the world's going. So yeah, we need to look into getting a video system and everything. And then he just kind of went on. And that was kind of the end of that conversation for a few minutes. And it's probably 10 minutes later, and he stops in mid-sentence. He and I were just meeting and talking about the schools, and we did that for I literally was there for 8 months meeting with him and learning from him before we ever had the first school. And but long story short, he just stopped in mid-sentence and he looks at me and he said, you do know that video is going to help the instructors a whole lot more than it'll help the pupils, right? So he was big on you not getting overly obsessed with how things looked. He knew that there were all different kinds of ways to swing the golf club. And certainly when you look at Tom Kite and Ben Crenshaw, both growing up under his wing and both being, around him most of their life.
And completely different in their approach
totally
to
different,
how
and
they did
totally
things.
different in the way he taught them. And Harvey used to say, it would be nothing for Tom to go hit 307 irons, on the practice tee. And he said, people thought Ben didn't practice. He said, but let me tell you, he said, on the coldest, nastiest, rainiest days, he said, there'd be one round at Austin Country Club. And he said, it'd be Ben Crenshaw and he'd play 36 holes. He said, Ben just got bored on the range. He loved to practice and create shots on the golf course. So Harvey had the genius to let Ben play and let Tom practice. And that's such an incredible foresight to be able, and that goes back to what I was talking about with Coach Hearn, with Harvey. Great coaches know how to handle athletes and know that they can't all do the same thing because they're not all alike. And I pride myself in trying to live by that mantra as a teacher.
It's you would think that if you talk to some of today's instructors that there's no way that Ben Hogan or Ben Crenshaw or anybody prior to now could have ever broken par. And those people are at the extreme. I mean, the coaching world kind of reminds me of the political world, right? You have these opposite poles, and you have the people in the middle who, like you and I, most likely, who probably can see the benefit of both things implemented at the right time. But I think that as you said, number one, knowing how to utilize it, where it was, as Mr. Penick said, it was going to be more beneficial to the instructors than it was a student. Because a student, you show them something on a screen, and you're the expert. They're there to learn from you. Can you see this? And they're always going to say yes. Or are they going to say no?
Oh, absolutely. And invariably, they may see something. I mean, if a person is a little overweight or something, they may get obsessed with how they look in the video as a person, as opposed to how the swing looks or what you're trying to show them. Or there's so many different things. Or they hyper focus on what I always say as a result and not a cause, and they don't hear you as well. So when I've got a 3D swing catalyst now, we use Flight Scope. I've got a 3-camera system. I've got all the bells and whistles, but the bottom line is it's really my responsibility to make them see what I know is going to make them play better. And boy, it's so hard. And I, to kind of circle back, the thing that I want to be careful not to offend some of in my profession, but I think there's so many people out there right now that try to prove they're the smartest guy in the room. And I think back to so many of the great golf magazine top 100 summits I've gone to with the likes of, of Chuck Cook and so many great teachers that have been there through the years that I've been there for 20 years now. And I love sitting around the seminars are great, but when you really learn is sitting around afterwards and just asking questions and sharing information and talking and visiting and learning how someone communicates this and how they see this and and I think back to what Harvey told me about Tom Kite. He said, Tom would listen to anybody. He said he would ask people walking up and down the range to take a look at his swing. And he said, but Tom had the innate ability. He could listen to any philosophy, any teacher, and he could pick and choose what would apply to him that he was looking for. And that's an art. And there's so many people that take the whole bottle of medicine, as Harvey used to be so famous for, as opposed to just taking those 2 aspirin that might apply to your game. Don't gulp down the whole bottle. And there's so many different ways to say the same thing. And that, to me, if there's any young aspiring teachers out there listening to us, the thing that I would tell you is to build a really huge vocabulary of how to say the same thing a whole bunch of different ways, because we all as coaches see that deer in the headlight look when you say something that you may have just had a player a day or two before that thought worked beautifully for, and the next player that's doing something similar, it may not resonate with them at all. So the ability to be able to say the same thing so many different ways, and that was Harvey's incredible genius. And something that it's indescribable as to how good at that he was.
Right, because the science is true.
Totally.
If you look at like the ball flight and face to angle or face to path and all those other things, but it is the one thing that I think science has showed is there is an inordinate amount of information out there, but it's like, okay, what's the recipe for that individual? Because applying it in the right way, and in the right way of what they need for that point in time, because it might be different now than it was 6 months ago. And as you
100%.
said, the most important is the way that how it goes from your head into their head, out your mouth into their ears, and can they comprehend it and process it? Because I look at all the different ways to teach, all the different swing theories, all the different ideas, and all of them work for certain people. Not all of them work for everybody.
100% agree. I think back to a few years ago, I was having lunch with David Ledbetter in San Antonio, and he was speaking at a section meeting we're having, and I got to know David pretty well when I was out on tour with Nota Begay and Jimmy Walker a bunch, and we were just sitting there, just the two of us having lunch, and we were talking about different swing theories, and he and I were talking about my time with Harvey, and in particular some advice that both of them had this, never discount. Harvey used to say this about teachers, and a lot of our listeners probably don't know. Harvey attributed a lot of his success as a teacher to, he was the head golf coach at the University of Texas for 32 years.
Long time. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And one of the things that Harvey does, and I'm going to pull my biggest hats off to one of my favorite coaches not in college golf, is Mike McGraw at Baylor University. Mike's been a friend of mine since the early 80s, and I'm proud to say I've got two players playing for him right now, and I've got a third that's the two-time defending Texas state junior champion, Zach Heffernan, that'll be going there next year. So I'll actually have three Bears. I'll have my three Bears next year that I'm pretty excited about. But Mike's one of the great coaches in college golf history, and the thing I love about Mike McGraw, I talk to him about my players and their golf swings all the time, and their golf, not just their golf swings, their golf game. And he's not one of these. He helps facilitate what we're doing. He doesn't try to change what we're doing. He doesn't try to make them play like each other. He understands that relationship. And Harvey, going back to him at his 32 years at coaching, every player he recruited, he would go spend several hours with that player and their teacher on the practice tee to learn what they were doing before they came to University of Texas. And he stayed in touch with those teachers, and he attributed a great deal of his success and knowledge to having spent time with so many teachers that had taught so many good players. And his and David Ledbetter's advice both were, listen to everybody. You don't have to agree with everything they say, but there are bits and pieces of things that you can take from all teachers out there, because like you said earlier, there's so many ways to teach the game, and they're all successful. I'm not going to tell you that I agree with everything that any teacher says, but I've learned if I've got a player that's struggling with turning some, I reach out to some of the things that George Gankus is famous for now. Mm-hmm. And it's not that I'm teaching George's theory, but it's dumb to think you can't learn a thing or two about helping someone make a better pivot on their backswing with some of the success he's had. And I go back to the Masters in 2000. I was there with Nota Begay, and that's the one tournament that we're not allowed to really walk the fairway once tournament week starts with the player. We have to walk outside the rope, and Nota and Tiger, are famous for their friendship, and it's a genuine friendship, and they've been loyal to each other for since they first met as junior golfers. But Butch Harmon and I were walking the fairway that day outside the ropes and just visiting. Tiger and Nota were playing a practice round, and we start talking about some of the different teachers and different theories in golf. And Butch shared something with me that he may not even remember today, but it really was incredible advice and something that I still remember and treasure. And the point was, Bryan, don't ever be afraid to just teach really solid fundamentals. He said that's what makes players better. And I'm proud to say we both shared in the success of a player. I taught Jimmy Walker for 12 years, and Jimmy had made a bunch of $1 million, but he hadn't quite gotten over the hump. And when Jimmy left a few years ago to move to Butch Harmon and all the success he had, I tell people in these types of situations all the time, if Jimmy thought didn't know what I was doing. Well, first off, Butch probably wouldn't have taken him if he wouldn't have known he was pretty solid to start with. And
especially at that point, because Butch was backing off his schedule.
Yes, exactly. And then secondly, to this day, I teach Jimmy's son and his wife. So I got to believe he trusts me a little bit, or I wouldn't be working with McLean. But my point is Jimmy and Jimmy will tell you this to this day. We're great friends. We still talk a tremendous amount, although I'm not working with him on his golf game. But the thing that Jimmy will tell you is that really he and Butch didn't change much in his golf game. The main difference is when Butch told him how good he was, it had more credibility, and he really believed him. And you can go back, though, to when he was Player of the Year on a nationwide tour. I made the comment that he would be a top 10 world player at some point in time in his career, and I'm extremely proud of the fact that he did achieve that. And as a coach, you're going to have players that come and go. And I think back to something Butch told me. He said, you can't ever worry about losing a player. He said, I had two players leave me on different occasions at a time when each one of them was ranked number one in the world golf rankings, in Greg Norman and Tiger Woods. So I'm not sure if you lose a player at that point in time, it's all the coach's fault. It's just sometimes these guys need to hear it a different way. And the relationships that you build with these players, when Jimmy and I sat down to have that discussion and that talk, I mean, we both cried. I mean, I started coaching him when he was a sophomore or a junior in college. I mean, and you don't go through the types of things that we went through and the ups and downs and all the success and the injuries and everything that come with that and get to that pinnacle of success and not have, if you don't have a relationship, well, shame on me, because I don't want to be that guy. I'm not going to be a coach that I don't have that kind of relationship with the player.
Yeah, it is difficult. It's like a breakup of a marriage or a long relationship. And to anyone that say it doesn't affect them, then you either weren't close enough to that player or as much as you thought, or maybe you need to look in the mirror. I was teaching a young man. He's playing in South Africa because his folks are there, and that's where he's from. And I started with Matt when he was a sophomore in college. And so sophomore in high school, 3 years of high school, 4 years in college, and then 2 or 3 years when he turned pro. And actually got to visit Cape Town where they live. That was a wonderful trip, and I'm forever indebted to his parents for housing us and setting everything up. But went over because he got to European Tour School second stage, and asked if I'd come over and work with him. And it got to a point that halfway around the world was just too far.
Right.
Even in the video and the Zoom had come about, and I understood it, and it stung, but I love the kid and that family to death, and I do want him to do the best that he be the best that he can be, and I enjoy watching him, and will enjoy watching him to continue once they get going again. But it does, you do miss those players when they are gone.
Oh, 100%. And when I have a player, I mentioned, Trey Bosco a while ago, that's a state AM champion here in Texas. And Trey was a little frustrated in that he's had other teachers and everything. He's going, how did I get to this point with my left hand being like that? And I immediately told him, I said, Trey, first and foremost, you wouldn't be where you are today if you hadn't been where you've been. I said, so don't go back and wonder why I didn't do this, why I didn't do that. I said, you're where you are because of who you are and where you came from. And I said, that's one of the things that growing up in the small town of Teague, Texas, I will never forget that. I will tell you to this day, the most enjoyable golf I've ever played was on that 9-hole golf course with the older gentleman that took Dale and I under their wing. And molded us into, hopefully, the human beings that we've become.
Mm-hmm.
And to think that, a person holds a grudge, I can promise you, Nota Begay, Jimmy Walker, two guys that I taught for years and years, had great success. Nota's career got cut short by an injury, a tragic injury, and working out. And Jimmy moved on to a different teacher. But I met with Nota in Dallas with my son back in December. We talk all the time. He sends me players from all over the country. I'm working with Gabby Lemieux, who plays on the Symetra Tour. Nota sent her to me. I teach a young lady that's in high school now in Albuquerque that he sent me. So, and as I said, I teach Jimmy's son. So you're going to have those kind of relationships. And like you said, if you don't, look in the mirror, because if you're a coach, I don't know of a single coach that I've ever played for that I didn't feel like cared about me first and foremost as a person. And I can tell you, the great ones always remember that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hadn't taught anybody at the levels that you had. But when they're around and they reach a certain level and they're around a lot of yes people, how do you manage that dynamic? Because you're working in a certain area of their game that has a drastic effect on their career. And if you turn into a yes person, that direction can change very quickly.
Oh, 100%. And I have a philosophy, and I want to tell you, I'll take it a step further. I don't ever want one of my players to have a caddy that's scared to lose his job.
Mm-hmm.
Before we're done tonight, I'll share one of the funniest stories ever about Nota and a dear friend of his, Mark Freeland, that is now his business.
Oh, go ahead and let's hear it now. Love to hear stories.
Okay, so Nota. We'll backtrack real quickly. I want to share this story about Nota, because how we got started is a lot of is a big answer to the question you're asking me about the yes people and things. So I had just moved to San Antonio. I was at La Cantera where Buddy Cook had brought me, and I'd spoken at a Southern Texas PGA meeting here in the area, and there was a gentleman named Don Zamora who was from Albuquerque originally, but was a PGA professional in the area, and still lives here. But Don was the head golf professional at Ladera Municipal Golf Course where Nota grew up, and the gentleman that had basically taught Nota most of his career, or at that point in time, which through college, worked for Don in the military there, and he had gotten transferred to Okinawa, and right after Nota finished at Stanford. And long story short, there's a long way away, like you mentioned with the young man from South Africa. Secondly, they had kind of changed some things, and Nota had been encouraged to try some of the Mo Norman philosophy, and he was struggling with his game. And so Don didn't really know me, but he had heard me speak, and I'd met him and just knew who he was. And I got a call at home one evening, and Don asked me, he said, Nota Begay's in town and he's been struggling, and he would like to come hear you teach. And Nota was very distrustful of any teacher just one time, because he had an All-American career at Stanford, and they had won the NCAA championship when Nota was a junior. They added Tiger Woods, didn't graduate anyone, and finished second by a shot the year after.
Right. Conrad Ray was on the show. He was,
yes,
and he talked about that.
Yeah, and Conrad's a great friend as well, and I wish I'd known that. I'd have listened in on that one. I'll have to go back and hear it.
I'll send it to
Conrad's
you.
A great
I'll
guy.
get it
Please
to
do. Nota felt responsible because Nota missed about an 8-footer on the 72nd hole that would have tied the team. So he was vulnerable, and he changed a lot of what he did with his game. Okay, and as a result of that change, he really started to struggle. I'm not saying that all the changes were bad, but so as a teacher, Pete, when someone asks if they can come out and watch you teach, what do you think? They're going to probably come out, maybe watch you give a lesson, maybe two. Well, I've always kind of been that guy that teaches from the beginning to the end. I start tomorrow morning because it doesn't get daylight quite at 7 now. So I start at 8 and I go to dark or 6 tomorrow night. And I do that almost every day, 5 days a week now. I used to do it 6, but I've gotten a little older and a little long in the tooth, so I don't do that as much. But anyway, long story short, I got there the next morning and Noda was already there. And, I introduced myself. We talked. I told him, feel free to ask questions, do whatever you want to. And I was booked all day. And I told him, I said, I'm going to be here all day. You feel free to stay as long as you want or whatever. And long story short, Noda didn't watch me give an hour or two of lessons. Noda watched me teach all day long, literally all day long. And he did go grab something to eat about 12 or 1 and came right back, was only gone about a half hour. We got done or I got done teaching, and he said, I really like how you present things. I like how you relate to people. I like how positive you are, how you present things in a positive manner. He goes, would you mind watching me hit a few balls? I said, no, I'll be happy to. And I probably watched him another hour and a half. It was in the summer. I think it was in like August. And long story short, I watched him for an hour and a half, and then I didn't hear a word from him for 3 months. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
3 months later, he's actually gotten conditional status on what was then the Nike tour, which, now the Korn Ferry tour. And he calls me out of the blue and said, hey, I don't know if you remember me or not, da-da-da-da-da. And of course, I did, obviously. And I said, no, I said, I'm a little surprised to hear from you because, I helped you for an hour and a half and I hadn't heard a word since. And he goes, no, I have to think through things. And he said, I've been working on exactly what you told me. And he said, things have gone really well. He said, I actually got my conditional status. And he said, I'd love before the season starts, said, I'm only going to get in a few events, and said, I'd love for you to come to Albuquerque and help me for a few days. And so would you be willing to do that? And we talked about when I could do it and everything. And I ended up flying out to Albuquerque, and I helped him for about 3 days out there. Didn't hear a word again for another probably 2 months. Not a word. I mean, not a phone call, not a word. Well, now you asked me about being a yes man. I was hot. Okay. I was like, what is this? I help a guy for an hour and a half. Then I don't hear from him for 3 months. I go help him for 3 days. Don't hear a word. And he calls me out of the blue, actually asked my office manager to come out and get me to interrupt the lesson. And I went to the phone. I told the person I was working with, said, look, he's insistent that I come in and answer. I promise I'm not going to cut you short. I'll be right back, and this will be a quick conversation. Trust me. And he told me at that point in time, he goes, things are really starting to come together. I'd like to come to San Antonio and see you. And anyway, I agreed to that. This was our third meeting. Okay. And he came in, we went to dinner, we talked, and he said, I think I would really like for you to be my coach. And I looked at him and I said, well, if this is your idea of how we're doing it, I'm not interested. And I think I kind of caught him off guard a little bit. And I said, look, I don't want this kind of relationship. If we're going to do this, I'm all in, but we got to stay in communication. He goes, no. He goes, I understand. And he said, I really like where we're headed. He said, I'm just, I'm having a hard time putting my game in anybody's hands. And so anyway, the way it worked from there, we agreed that we would stay in constant communication, do those things. And I'll never forget, because right before he left, we were sitting in my office visiting, and he goes, if I can just get in 3 events in a row, I really think I can do something special. Well, the third event in a row was in Virginia, and Noda shot 59 and, kind of etched himself in golf history, because at that point in time, it hadn't been done very often.
Mm-hmm.
And just the thing that impressed me so much about Noda and where I knew he was special, yes, he shot 59 that year, but he also shot 62 4 times and 63 3 times on what was in the Nike Tour. And so fast forward, he's having a lot of success. He hadn't won. He didn't even win the week he had the 59. He didn't shoot in the 60s in that tournament. Shot 3 rounds in the low 70s and 59. Okay, and finished second. But he was playing in an event out on the West Coast, and I believe in Oregon. And Mark Freeland, his buddy from Stanford, and who's now his business manager, and Mark's a great guy. We've shared so many fun times and stories and trips and everything and success together. But Mark was taking the summer caddying for him. And Mark they were at a point where if he finished second or better, he secured his card with 2 or 3 events left in the season. He was going to have enough money that, he was going to be on the PGA Tour next year. And, Noda's a very strong-willed personality and someone I love like a second son. I can't tell you what I think of the guy and what a stand-up man he is and what a great father and husband he is. And we're just super, super friends. But so he's caddying. He's in second place on the 9th hole on Saturday. Okay. And he's got it in the left rough behind the trees on a par 5, about to hit his third shot in from about 115 yards out of the rough. And it's kind of a bent bluegrass rough up there. The wind's blowing about 15 miles an hour right to left. He can't get it over the trees. The shot he wants to hit is a cut with a pitching wedge out of the long rough to a back left pin with crossing wind right to left and out of bounds immediately left of the green. And Mark said, no, let's just pitch it out in the fairway and we'll get it up and down. We're in good shape in this tournament. Everything's solid. We're in good shape. And Noda goes, no, I'm going to hit the wedge. And Mark kind of moves over in front of him. He goes, no, let's pitch it out. And at this point in time, Noda throws a few adjectives at him and tells him to get out of the way. I'm going to hit this shot. And Mark picks up his staff bag, slams it on the ground in front of it, and pardon me, but I'm just going to say what he said. He goes, you may whip my ass, but you're going to pitch it out. And Noda was furious, and Mark just stood his ground. He wouldn't move. And so Noda pitched it out in the fairway, chunked it on the front of the green, and made it from 40 feet for par. And to hear the two of them tell that story and laugh about it, and then where the fun of the story is, he went on and finished second. But I learned something as a coach early on there, that you've got to be strong with these guys, because what makes these guys special is their innate ability to hit the shots under pressure. And they always think they can do something that sometimes may not be the smartest play. I'm not telling you that I don't love for them to be aggressive and love for them to take risk, but they've also got to have a team around them that's not scared to stand up to them. And as a coach, you can't be afraid to get fired. And you know what? You're going to get fired sometimes as a coach. But if you're doing what you know is right as a coach and as a teacher, and they choose to do something else, so be it. But the biggest disservice that any golf instructor on this planet can do is to just be agreeable with a player. You've got to stand your ground. You've got to do what you know is right. And I can't tell you how much I learned from Noda Bigay, because Noda challenged me. He challenged everything I told him. I had to explain it in a manner that A, understood it, and number 2, he believed in it, number 3, he knew was right, and number 4, that he knew he could perform under the intense pressure of playing at the highest level with. And I mean, we had, before his injury, we went from not having any status on any tour in in 1997 to we were flying private in 2000. So it was a
Pretty
really
good,
fast run,
right.
and something that was very special. And like I said, to give you an idea of those relationships, I don't think I have a better relationship with anybody on the planet than Noda right now. I know I can pick up the phone and call him as a friend, and he'll be there, and he absolutely knows that he can do that with me.
Do you develop an instinct for pushing players at that level without worrying
You
about losing your job?
You really do, and you know what you can do and what you can't, and push them. And I've got a great situation right now in that I teach two brothers that are incredibly special. One is Mitchell Meisner, who played at Rice University, was the 2018 Texas State Amateur Champion, and I'm proud to say in 2020, he's a Latin American Tour player, but with Latin America being shut down because of COVID, Mitchell is now one of three players in the state of Texas history to have won a Texas State Amateur and a Texas State Open. He won the Texas State Open championship this summer, and graduated from Rice University. Is incredible student. I think Mitchell made 1B. I don't think, I know he made 1B at Rice University, which I won't belittle Lamar University where I graduated, but trust me, Lamar is not Rice. Okay, in terms of the academic criteria for getting in and staying in and staying eligible. But his brother Mac Meisner is a senior at SMU and is on the final list, trying to make a Walker Cup team right now, and is an incredible player, has broken almost all of Bryson DeChambeau's records at SMU. And those two guys, I have taught Mac since he was in the 8th grade, and I've taught Mitchell since he was a sophomore in high school, both here in Alamo Heights and in San Antonio. And they couldn't be more different than Mitchell is 5'8" and Mac is about 6'3", and they couldn't be more different than their height and the way that I have to approach and teach them and how I work with them. Mac is very much a pitcher and a field guy. Mitchell is very much an intellectual in terms of the way he likes to approach the game. And if I've got them back to back, I'm schizophrenic and need to take a break afterwards, because you can't teach them the same, and nor should you. And what a disservice I would do to each of them. And I always think about when, I really kind of parallel working with them to what Harvey did with Tom and with Ben, because even though they weren't brothers, they were very much like them. In terms of Mac is very much like Ben, and Tom and Mike, Tom and Mitchell are very much alike. And to look at those relationships and to see how those things evolve from a coach to a player, and how you have to kind of wear a multitude of hats, it is so important to keep that in mind and never lose sight of that. But also to know that, these guys are depending on you to be right. And the one thing I always try to remember is it's okay to tell a player, I need to think about that and I'll give you an answer tomorrow. And I can't tell you how many times I've done that. And with all of these players where, I would go home and really contemplate what I was going to say and not just say something off the top of my head, because that's the biggest disservice as a coach that I think you can do to any player. You've got to understand that what you say is going to impact the great players one way or the other. And so many times it can have an easier negative impact than it can a positive. And you really have to think through those things before you just throw something out there.
Yeah, I think understanding the player as a person, because when you do say something and the words you use, the way you say it and everything else, you have to know what tangents they might have a likelihood to get off on. And then how you're going to direct them back and keep them on track. Because at that level, the any mistake is magnified.
Well, and that's the thing as a coach to me, when we go circle back to the technology and not trying to be the smartest guy in the room as a coach, trying to really be the person that cares about the player and cares about it. And I'm not saying that brilliant technical coaches aren't great teachers. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that I try to pride myself in knowing the impact that those simple words are going to have on that player, and really understanding that it's such a crucial part of our job, is to really think through those things and not just throw something out there. And the bottom line is, it still goes back to what I said earlier, is you got to make them know they're better than they even may well be. Because one of the things that I've worked for forever with Jimmy on, Jimmy came out of Baylor University, which Baylor's now a big-time golf program. But when Jimmy was there, Jimmy kind of put Baylor on the map in golf, to be honest with you. They weren't very good when he went there. And so when he first got on tour, a lot of the talk of the things that I did with him were trying to get him comfortable in the locker room, because Pete, you've been in there, you know how intimidating a PGA Tour locker room can be. And I was lucky because of Noda and Tiger's relationship, in 99, 2000, 2001, I'm not sure there was ever a bigger stage to be a young coach on. I kind of grew up with Noda out there. He was my first big time tour player, and it was one of those situations where nobody had really ever heard of me. And I'll even share a story with you. I always feel like I got thrown in. I should ask Butch this at some point in time. I haven't thought to ask him, but I think I got thrown a test question at the Open Championship at St. Andrews on Tuesday night. We went over to the putting green, and a lot of our listeners may not be aware, but Noda was famous for putting right to left putts right-handed, left to
the bullseye
right putts
putter.
left-handed.
Yep.
Yeah, and he'd done that his whole career. And when I first started working with Noda, I actually reached out to Tinsley Penick, Harvey's son, and I said, hey, and this goes back to what we're talking about as a coach. I didn't say anything about it. I looked at his stroke, and it was interesting. I got to tell you, I've never seen anybody do it. But I looked at his stroke and looked at it both ways, and I picked up the phone and called Tinsley Penick in Austin and said, hey, I want to talk to you about this pupil I've got, and he's something special. What do you think your dad would do? And I'll never forget Tinsley's words and advice. He said, well, I can tell you what he wouldn't do. He said he wouldn't change it right away. and what great advice. But that, again, goes back to, I wasn't going to give my 2 cents to Noda about what I thought about it, because he believed in it. And so we're fast forward to 2000. By now, we had a whole lot of success. Noda had won 2 times that year and 2 times the year before already. We're at a point in time where things are growing great, and we're, now in the Open Championship. He'd just come off of a 4th place finish in the Scottish Open, and, he's playing great, and played a practice round with Tiger, and we're late in the evening over putting on the putting green behind the bleachers, behind number 1 tee there. And Butch walks up to me and he goes, real quietly, he goes, so which stroke is better? And I made Butch walk to the other end of that enormous putting green, and it was Colin Montgomery, Noda, and Tiger were the only 3 people there. There was my son, who was 8 years old at the time, and another little boy were sitting outside the ropes watching him. And Butch and I walked to the other end of the green because I wouldn't answer the question where Noda could even hear me. But here was my response to him, and I've always believed, and I need to pick up the phone and call Butch and ask him if this was a test question, because Noda and I have laughed about it over the years. But I think Tiger might have put him up to saying, see if this guy knows what he's talking about anyway. And when he asked me which stroke was better, and I said, Butch, I said, fundamentally, there's no doubt his left-handed stroke's far better than his right. I said his right-handed stroke goes back pretty well, but he loops it slightly outside and cuts it a little. I said, but there's one thing to remember. Almost every clutch putt he's made in his career to win was right-handed, so he thinks his right-handed stroke's better. So I never, now Noda and I have talked about that, but while he was playing competitively, I never shared that story with him because I didn't want that in his head. I wanted him to believe he was better from both sides.
Mm-hmm. And does that kind of go back to what you said earlier about your football coaches and what you learned from them, and they had a way to make athletes that they were coaching think that they could do things that they might not have ordinarily thought that they could have?
100%. And that's where I've reached out, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to make sure I get this to Coach Hearn. He just celebrated his 80th birthday recently, and as soon as I get this, I'm sending it to him, because I've told him this, but I genuinely, he and Harvey Penick helped me more than I could ever possibly describe, as in terms of not just about golf, but about communication, about caring about humans. Coach Hearn, I asked him in particular, this was recently, this was probably a year ago. I asked him about a linebacker that we had, that I will not share his name on the air, but I always, as players, we always thought this particular linebacker got treated a little differently than all the rest of us. And I asked him about it recently, and he goes, yeah, he said, I'll share you a conversation about him. And he said, when I went to his house to recruit him, he said, I found out that his father was in prison, had been fairly abusive to him. And he said, I sat there, his family had a ton of problems. And he said, his grandmother looked me in the eye and said, if he comes to play for you, are you going to take care of him? And he said, I gave her my word I would take care of him. And he said, I can promise you this. He didn't need anybody yelling at him or beating on him. He said, I went fishing with your dad. I knew I could get in your face mask. So, it was one of those things that he learned how not only a player reacted on the field, but he learned what was important outside of football, outside of golf, outside of the arena that they're competing in. And that's huge. I mean, it's so incredibly important to understand that as a coach. If you don't know that, you're not the right coach for that player at that level. I can assure you. It's especially true at a higher level, but it's also incredibly true at a young level, as these players come to you as junior golfers, and you build them up. And, I think back to a time Mitchell Meisner was a senior, and he had just made HAGA All-American, and they were having a little ceremony at the club for him here in San Antonio. And Mac, his younger brother, was a freshman on his high school golf team, and they finished third in 5A in Texas that year. And that's, I mean, Texas golf is pretty special in high school. And Mac, as a freshman, looks up at me, and at this point in time, he's, now he's 6'3", but he was tiny then. He was hitting fairway wood to every par four, and a lot of times hitting a hybrid or something on all the mid-range par threes, just because he was so tiny at the time, didn't hit it very far. And he looks up at me as someone's kind of glorifying all the accomplishments of Mitchell and everything there. And Mac looks at me and just gives me this real sarcastic, oh, great, Mitchell wins another award. And we leave that room, and he looks up at me and he goes, I'm going to beat him in a tournament this year. Okay, well, now, his older brother's the number one player on the team, one of the best players in the state, had won nearly everything he played in all year. And lo and behold, at the state high school golf tournament, Mitchell didn't have a great tournament. Mac did, and that was the first time he ever beat him. And Mitchell had never lost to him in a high school golf tournament until the state championship his senior year in high school.
Wow. Which one of those brothers was ready to quit, and you helped turn him around?
Mitchell actually was this is a phenomenal story. And to this day, I'm got a text from him right before we went on the air. He's playing in an event in Dallas right now just to get ready for the Latin American season. And Mitchell had played in the Auburn tournament. His dad had come back from that event and talked to me a little bit and said, Mitchell's just ready to quit. He said, he told his dad after the event, he said, I'll be so glad when he was a senior at Rice. And he said, I'll be so glad when this year's over, because I just don't want to do this anymore. He had hit 51 greens in regulation in a 54-hole event and shot 4 over for the tournament, and didn't have a double or a triple or anything. He just had putted horrifically. And it was interesting, Pete, in that technically he was super sound on the putting green, but and in practice. But when he got under competition, right-handed, he just didn't make putts. It wasn't that he three-putted a bunch. He just never made the critical putts to succeed. And he came home for the Thanksgiving break, and I sat down with he and his dad and talked to him. Actually, his dad and I were going to SMU on a drive up there to work with Mac before an event that he had. And we were driving up, and I talked to him about it, and I thought back to Noda putting, left to righters left-handed, right to lefters right-handed, and I just felt like we'd tried everything, and Mitchell would in a round, he might try 4 different grips. I mean, he'd go left hand low, he'd split grip, he'd go conventional, he'd, you name it. He'd claw it, he'd go left hand low claw. He might have 3 or 4 grips and 9 holes. It was just such a tough thing for him. And so I talked to his dad about it, and I said, I think he personally needs a total reset. I said, I'd like to talk to him when he comes home for Thanksgiving about considering just wiping the slate clean and switching to left-handed. And when he got home, he said, interestingly, my roommate's left-handed. And he said, I was just piddling around the apartment the other day with his putter. And he said, I wouldn't mind giving it a try. Well, we spent probably 2 hours working on the putting green that day. And he left and went to a place called Comanche Trace, which is up in Kerrville, Texas, a really, really nice golf course with absolutely spectacular bent grass greens. And he went and played 27 holes straight from leaving Cordillera where we were working. And he made 11 birdies in 27 holes. Now, he had some 3 putts, but he called me on the way home. He goes, I hadn't had that many putts go in. He said, some of the longer putts, my speed's off because it's just so foreign. He goes, but what happened, and this is where it evolved, it gave him permission to miss. He didn't get frustrated because in his mind, it's like, well, what the heck? I'm putting left-handed. It doesn't matter.
He didn't have the expectation.
Didn't have the expectation level. So now let's fast forward. We worked on it all over the Christmas break. And now I've got to pick up the phone and call a dear friend in coaching, Justin Emmel at Rice. And I knew Mitchell had experimented so much with putting that Coach Emmel was going to probably doubt, oh, great. Now he's going left-handed. We haven't done this. We've done everything else. But I called Coach Emmel and I said, look, Coach, I don't want you to think this is some harebrained idea. I said, this is where we are. And I said, I'm going to be honest with you. I really like how it's evolving, and it's taken some pressure off of him. Well, lo and behold, Coach Emmel goes, well, Bryan, he's my best player. He's a senior. And now you're telling me he's going to go into his final semester as a college golfer and we're going to switch sides. And I said, look, let's just see how it evolves. And he goes, well, let's do this. He goes, we've got a big tournament, the All-American, which coincidentally is next week in Houston. But this was, right when he first went back over the Christmas break. And Justin said, well, let's just see how he does in qualifying first under some pressure of qualifying. Well, he goes out to the Golf Club of Houston where they played the Shell for many years. He shoots 6 under the first qualifying round. And then it just kind of evolved. He had, I believe he finished 18th or 19th in that event. Went on to win 2 events, including conference. Won another event that summer and then became the Texas State Amateur Champion later on that summer and finished second in the North-South, all putting left-handed. And I'm proud to say to this day now, it's absolutely one of the strengths of his game. But
amazing.
That was just knowing that he needed a fresh start. There were just too many ghosts, hanging around under competition. And once we got him wiped clean, he hits the ball beautifully, and he's a wonderful player, and he's having great success. And I'm ready for this COVID. I know the world's ready for COVID to get behind us, but for these young pros that have such an opportunity to move ahead, Tony Hakala, another player that I teach, he's won a match play event in Latin America. He won one of the Local IQ Canadian Latin American events this year that the PGA Tour put on in Florida. And, to see these guys really with no way to go to tour school, no way to do anything, and just trying to find things to play in and everything. It's a little frustrating, but thank goodness they've got golf, and thank goodness that, there are events out there playing, and it's just exciting to see. And, but yeah, that was something quite special. And needless to say, at the NCAA regions, Mitchell actually finished 8th. He didn't get to they didn't do well as a team, but he didn't get there individually. They only took one individual out of there, and that was Thornberry out of Ole Miss, I believe. And anyway, long story short, I would put my arm around Coach Emmel's shoulder as we were walking off the 18th green after Mitchell finished. And I said, Coach, I said, I want to thank you. And I looked him in the eye and I said, I can't tell you, there's only a handful of coaches in the country that would have trusted the process and trusted what I was doing. And he kind of laughed and he said, Bryan, I'm not going to tell you it was easy, but I knew you had his best interest at heart. And that goes back to knowing your player, knowing what you've got to do, and not be willing to, do something a little unconventional, because what a disservice that would have been to golf. And, no matter what happens the rest of Mitchell Meisner's playing career, and I genuinely expect him to be playing golf for many, many years to come, because he's a phenomenal player and an even better human being. But I can tell you right now, if he'd stayed putting right-handed, I know he wouldn't be playing professional golf today. I know he probably would not be at this point in time one of 3 players in the history of the game of golf in the state of Texas to be both a Texas State Amateur and a Texas State Open champion. And if you look at those 2 trophies, there's some great names on those trophies.
Yeah, I can only imagine. You have a very good reputation as being a very good short game coach, wedges, and then you've had 2 of the best wedge players on tour in the modern era in Noda and Jimmy. Which came first, the chicken or the egg in that?
Well, I think from a playing resume, I hit it so bad I had to be a good wedge player.
that was your problem solving as we go back to the beginning
I
of
had to
the
figure
show.
out a way to compete, and part of Coach Hurton, going back to that, of making me believe I was better than I was, I had to figure out a way, because I wasn't very good driving it. I hit it far, but I hit it crooked, so you had to figure out how to figure it out. And I became a really good chipper and pitcher of the ball, and part of that goes back to growing up on a 9-hole golf course that wasn't in great condition, other than to this day, we had some of the best stiff dwarf greens I've ever putted on in my life, growing up as a kid, which is a blessing. But around the greens, it was challenging, to say the least. And you kind of evolved there. But I owe a lot of that to Noda and to Jimmy for being willing to try things, to not being closed-minded and thinking you had to do it this way or that way. And I was fortunate in that I had 2 guys that were remarkable wedge players, in their own right. And I'd like to think that, I helped them develop that and really turn those things into true strengths of theirs. And Jimmy led the tour in chip-ins the last 2 years that we worked together. Noda was one of the best 60-degree wedge players in the game, and to this day, in my opinion, still is. He could do things with a wedge that, I can't tell you how many tens of thousands of balls that I would toss out one at a time. And the one thing I made both those guys do when we were practicing, they couldn't touch it. I pitched the ball out there and they hit it how it was, because I think one of the great things in short game that maybe isn't taught as well as it should be at times is you have to read the lie. And
lie recognition determines the shot you're going to hit more so than the situation you're in.
Absolutely. And Noda used to have, a saying that he always to me, he would look at me and share with me, and it'd say, that's what they bought their ticket for when he had hit one of those shots. That's why they bought their ticket, to come see that shot. And I'll share a quick story with Mac this year at Bandon Dunes. I actually put my caddy bib on and trekked around Bandon Dunes with him, and the first day of the stroke play, we were playing Bandon Dunes. The wind's blowing about 20 or 25, which is pretty normal for out there. And he'd hit the first 14 greens in regulation, and the par 3 15th hole, he had a 4-iron, and the pin was right on the front. And if he missed it 2 yards right of the pin, it's going to roll back down the hill and probably be 50 yards from the green. So I said, at that point in time, we were 6 under par, and looked at it, and I said, so let's aim at the left fringe, Mac. I mean, that's only going to be 15, 16 feet from the hole if we hit it on the left fringe. And we get there, and he's behind a sprinkler head and a control valve box, and it's just a bad luck. He hit it about a yard or two left of the green, and if those hadn't been there, we'd have been able to just roll it down there. But we just weren't sure. And we agonized over it, and he was afraid if he caught the fringe chipping it, it might shoot across the green, go down the hill. So we just decided to aim it left and try to make a 5-footer, and he horseshoe did and made a bogey. But I'd already told him, I said, look, we've got a drivable par 4 on the 16th. The 18th is a par 5. I said, we're going to make another birdie or two. If we made bogey or 5 under, no big deal. Well, he hits a great second shot up. He hits his tee ball up just past the green on the drivable par 4, pitched it up there to a couple of feet, makes birdie. Then he makes a great iron shot on 17, makes birdie there. And now we've got a reachable par 5 on 18, and he bombs a tee ball. And the pin is kind of front left in a bowl, and it's the only place on the golf course you don't want to be is left, okay? And I've taught Mac since he was in the 8th grade, and I'm going to tell you something special. And even Mitchell will tell you, he's incredible with his wedge. His wedge game around the green is second to no one that we've mentioned on this show. No disrespect to Noda or Jimmy or anybody else, but he's just that special with it. And he pull hooks a 3-wood, and it kind of ends up, the wind's blowing left to right, and he pull hooks it, and it's downwind over a giant mound to a tuck pin. It's just absolutely the only place you don't want to be. And Dr. Meisner, Mitchell and Mac's dad, Kurt's walking with us, and he's kind of over there looking at the lie, and I know he's thinking, oh gosh, let's just get a par and get out of here, because the hazards on the other side of the green, just everything you can imagine. It's downwind, over ridge, hard green, no green to work with. And I walk back there right before he's ready to hit this, and I get right in his face. And I won't say all I said, but basically I really emphasized, you're the best player I've ever taught at hitting this shot. And I threw a few adjectives in, and I said, you show me something, show me a shot. And I'm proud to say he took the challenge, hit it to a foot, tapped it in, and 64 was a pretty incredible score that day on Bandon Dunes. But that again goes back to challenge these guys. They're special for a reason. And that's what you want. And as a caddy, as a coach, you've got to have that, and you've got to push these guys to the limit, because it's not going to get easier as they move up the food chain. If you think it's easy playing with Brooks Koepka, or Bryson or Tiger, we hadn't even talked about Tiger, but my gosh, all the times that we spent with Noda and Tiger together. I go back to 2000. In 2000, at the end of the year, Noda, I learned a lot from, not just in terms of him trying things in short game and the switch putting, and obviously is a phenomenal player, but I also learned Noda ran Noda Begay Enterprise in Incorporated. At the end of the year, he would bring in coach, caddy, business manager, agent, the whole team got together, and we'd spend 2 or 3 days in San Antonio, and he took us shopping, and we'd have dinners, and we'd play golf and do all those things. But we had a business meeting, and we'd sit around and, and discuss, hey, this is what we did, what we can do better. And one of the tough questions I asked him at the end of 2000, I asked Noda, I said, look, are you okay playing with Tiger as much as we play? Because, they played practice rounds together almost every week. They were partners in the President's Cup, and they played Ernie and VJ and beat them twice in the President's Cup. And then he beat Retief Goosen in the individuals, in the singles at the Robert Trent Jones Club up in Virginia. And, but we just played every week almost with quite arguably the player that's maybe played golf better than it's ever been played in the history of the game. Watching Tiger week in and week out that year was incredible. And my responsibility, I enjoyed getting to pick Tiger's brain. I would try to always ask him a question during a practice round. I didn't want to be that guy that, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? I just, in the course of an 18-hole practice round, there's going to be a time I could ask a question and try to pick his brain and learn from him. But my responsibility was to make Noda Begay as good as he could be. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to make sure that Noda psychologically was okay playing with somebody that's playing golf arguably as well as it had ever been played in history. And he looked at me and goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, it's no secret. This guy's won 3 majors in a row, and he's dominated everything. Are you okay? Because he is playing better golf than anyone's ever played. And I said, Noda, you've won more times worldwide in the last 14 months than anyone except him. But are you okay? You've won 4 times. He's won 15 during that time frame. My responsibility is to you. And he appreciated that. He thought about it for a minute, and he looked at me and he said, no, I know where the bar is. He said, absolutely, I'm fine with it. And from that point, I never questioned it because I knew how strong Noda was mentally. But other players, it'd have been pretty difficult. I think back to Jimmy Walker qualified for the Byron Nelson as an amateur when he was at Baylor, and he went up to play a practice round after school one day on a Tuesday, and he was on a par 3, and this guy popped up on the hill and said, hey, do you mind if I play in with you? And they were just playing the last couple of holes. Well, lo and behold, he nearly swallowed his tongue at that point in time because the guy that popped up and asked, could I join you? And this is in, I think in 2000 was Tiger Woods. Well, you can imagine a college player and, can I join you for a couple of holes?
Right.
It's it is the GOAT at that point in time. So it's just, you always want what's best for that player.
I've got to ask you before we get into a couple other things, and we're starting to wind down on time, but I don't want your wife mad at me, and even though I've never met her. But George Goyich was the one that kind of introduced us, and he wanted me to ask you about working at Oak Tree and the person that in the one Calcutta one year. He said, be sure to ask Bryan to tell that story.
Well, it actually happened right before I went to work there, the summer, I think, before I went to work there. But what a special time. I'd actually played college golf against Bob Tway and Willie Wood and Andy Dillard and Rafael Alarcon, who I want to get you to talk to at some point in time. He was a wonderful tour player and in his own right, but he also was Lorraine Ochoa's only coach as well, and a dear friend of mine. But anyway, when I went to work at Oak Tree, they always had, at that point in time, the member guest was called the Nutcracker. And the year prior to me going to work there, they always had it the same weekend as the U.S. Open. And the Calcutta was outrageous at that point in time, and it was well in excess, and this, keep in mind, this is the mid-1980s, well in excess of $400,000. Wow,
was it all oil money?
Oh, yes, absolutely, oil and gas money up there. And the interesting thing, the way it came about was on Sunday, as they're coming down the stretch, the U.S. Open's going on television, and they've got the they've got the Nutcracker going on, and first place in the U.S. Open was not worth as much money as first place in the member guest at Oak Tree Golf Club that year.
God, that's amazing.
So there were some amazing stories. What a great place that it was to work at that point in time. And, we used to have games with Scott Verplank and Willie and Andy Dillard, Bob Tway, the Edwards brothers were both there, Dr. Gil Morgan. Gil's another person that Gil had just gone through a shoulder surgery, and I learned a great deal just sitting around while he was recovering from shoulder surgery, because I'd had the same rotator cuff surgery a few years prior, and we kind of developed a bond over that, and really I got to pick his brain a great deal there. And what a wonderful ball striker he was. Holy cow, he did so incredibly good. But we would play games where in the winter we'd, just play from the pro shop to the seventh green. Matter of fact, I still to this day, the finest four that I've ever witnessed in golf was made by Andy Dillard, and we played from the flagpole by the pro shop at Oak Tree to the seventh green. And all I can tell you is, at best we could gather is about a half a mile, and it was over two different lakes. And we cut down the driving range and across a couple of holes, and then he chipped it in. And it was he had to hit a driver down the driving range, laid up in the second fairway, and then hit a driver off the deck over two lakes in the fifth green and onto the very back of the seventh green, and then chipped it in for a four. So we had a lot of fun up there, and what a special place, and what an incredible golf course.
You had mentioned some of the Lorena Ochoa's teacher, gentleman. I don't remember his name.
Rafael Alarcon.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, Texas is full of some unbelievable teachers. We talked about Chuck Cook, and obviously Chris Como's there, and him, and Randy Smith and Cameron McCormick and John Sinclair, who's been on the podcast as well. Jim Hardy, and I'm sure there's a number more that maybe aren't coming to mind. If I offend anybody, I'm sorry, but is the relationship, because it's obviously a big place, but is the relationship amongst all of you there where you're calling each other, sharing ideas, and what do you think about this? And hey, I've been working on this. Can you give me your input? Or is it more maybe older school, keeping the cards close to the chest?
It's I think all of us as teachers have people that we know that teach similarly to us that we reach out to if we've got a question with something. I can't tell you how many times that I've reached out to Raphael. There's also a gentleman that I think is one of the finer teachers in the country that taught a lot, that actually learned a whole lot from Chuck Cook, a gentleman named Wayne Flint out of Birmingham, Alabama. And Wayne's a brilliant mind. He's taught a lot of great players, taught Jason Duffner when he was younger. He's taught a lot of wonderful players, a lot of successful college players, real similar philosophy to mine. And, anytime, and we all, the three of us always, Wayne and I go back and forth, he and I, with different players. Raphael and I do the same thing. It's just one of those situations where I think you always want to do something style-wise, but Texas in particular, I'd like to think I have a great relationship with a whole bunch of teachers in the state, especially two that you mentioned. Randy Smith and I have been friends. Randy used to let me play at Royal Oaks when he was the director of golf out there in the early 80s when I just turned pro. I would go out to Royal Oaks when I was in the Dallas area and play a lot. And Randy and I, he was working with Justin Leonard, in the late 90s and Harrison Fraser and a number of those players. And Gary Woodland when Gary first came on the tour in the early 2000s. And we're very good friends. We've done some teaching seminars together, and Chuck Cook and I, one of my finest, one of the things that I cherish the most, I had an incredible summer because of the players that I teach, not because of anything I did, but in a span of about a month's time, Mac Meisner won the Southern Amateur with an unbelievable 66, the final round at Merideau, which is one of the hardest places on planet Earth. A few days later, He didn't play well in the Western Am, and I told his dad had gone up and caddied for him in the Western, and I told his dad while he was up there, I said, don't tell Mac not to be upset, and you don't worry, you and Katie don't worry as a family. I said, Mitchell's going to win the state open this week. So this was the very next week. His brother wins the Texas State Open championship. And then later that week, a young man named Zach Heffernan, who I've taught since he was either 10 or 11 years old, I think 10 or just before. I think I started teaching him just before his 11th birthday, became the third player in the 94-year history of the Texas Junior Amateur to win back-to-back championships. And he won it when he was 16 and won it when he was 17. He's got another year to play in it. No one's ever won it 3 times in succession. And I'll give you a little bit of a hint. Of the 3 players that have won it back-to-back, one of them is not named Crenshaw because Bruce Litsky won it between Ben's 2 titles. So it's been very special, and I want to especially reach out to Ben Crenshaw. When Zach won it the first year, the first thing that he said when he called me right after winning 2 summers ago, he called me from Houston and he said, man, I said, what's the greatest thing about it? And he said, it's unbelievable to have your name on the same trophy as Ben Crenshaw, which, you know, here's a 16-year-old kid at the time. And I shared that with Ben. I texted Ben and told him what Zach had said. And Ben didn't even, to give you the kind of guy that Ben Crenshaw is, Ben didn't even ask me. He called the club, asked for his parents' address, and mailed him a Masters flag congratulating him on winning the Texas State Junior Championship.
Wow,
and
that's awesome.
You want to talk about a fan for life, and then to see Zach win it back to back. But anyway, so in that frame, he won that the same week that Mitchell won. And then as we're at a couple of weeks later, we're at the U.S. Amateur, and sitting there and having lunch with Johnny Kiefer from Baylor and with Mac and his dad and their parents and Johnny's parents. And we're getting a hole by hole, shot by shot detail of Trey Bosco winning the Texas State Amateur in that 4-week stretch. And then I don't want to forget one thing, Kathy Crumley, a senior AM that I teach, won the Texas Women's Eclectic Championship. So
Jeez,
I was
you had a hell of a summer.
in the Texas Golf Association this summer. I had 4 champions, but the thing I was going to say, one of the most cherished things that I have, Chuck Cook posted on Facebook about the success of my pupils, and his hat's off to me for that. And I can tell you, to have an icon like Chuck Cook, you know, give you a pat on the back, there's nothing been more special in my lifetime. No award will ever mean what the congratulations from someone as respected as Chuck in the game.
The peer recognition is always quite a feat. And usually better than any award that's been voted on.
I can assure you, that's as fine award as an award as you can ever have, and because of those players, I'm very proud to say that I actually was named the Harvey Penick Southern Texas PGA Teacher of the Year for 2020 for the 3rd time, and it's all about the players. It's kind of a special thing. They're actually coming tomorrow to film because of COVID, they're filming an awards presentation deal. And to have Zach Heffernan as a 2-time Texas Golf Association Texas Junior Am Player of the Year, you know, to have that happen. And I didn't even mention one other Am that I need to, Colby Harwell, who has twice won the Texas State Mid-Am Match Play and Texas State Mid-Am Stroke Play. Unfortunately was runner-up in both of those events this year, so I almost had one more. But it was a great year for a lot of great players, and again, my sincere appreciation to Chuck Cook for doing that. I just, words can't express what that meant, as you well know.
With all the players you worked with, from beginners to most accomplished players in the world, is there any lesson that stands out as the best lesson you've ever given?
Oh, the ones that always mean the most to me, and I genuinely mean this. When I teach, well, let me back it up. On a professional level, obviously the best one I must have ever given was the one that I gave to Noda that I didn't hear from for 3 months, and 3 years later we were on the world stage in the President's Cup. But I didn't know that at the time. But I won't say it's one individual lesson in particular. The ones that stand out to me that mean the most, though, and I genuinely mean this, and I have a lot of people come to me and say, I've got a beginner that I want to get started. Do you have someone that you can recommend? And I always say, please bring them to me. Let me start with them, because the ones that stand out to me, Pete, are the wife of an avid golfer that has never played, and I give them a lesson, and knowing that they're going to travel and play golf and enjoy the game together for the rest of their life. My wife Jill and I just got back from an incredible golf trip for 8 days in Scottsdale with a husband and wife that I teach, and his husband and his brother and his wife went with us, and the brother's wife was a very new golfer, and we had a great time, and she hit some spectacular shots out there, and knowing that you impacted someone's life that's going to have, their children are playing golf, they're going to play golf as a family. Those are the ones that are special, because you know what, the expectation of working with tour players, I always tell people this in interviews and everything, that it's incredibly rewarding, walking up the back of the 18th green at Valhalla when we knew going into the last round that Ken Venturi was not going to pick Noda as the captain's pick. And my hat's off to Ken Venturi for telling Noda that week that he had to play his way onto the team. And we knew that he had to top 10 in a major, and something he had never done. So that the pressure of that week started with him knowing on Tuesday that he had to top 10 in a major championship to make the President's Cup team, with Tiger Woods pleading for him to be on it, and Captain Venturi telling him that he didn't have enough international experience, he wasn't going to pick him, but he wanted him on the team and he thought he would play his way on, is a pretty rewarding birdie on 17 and 18 to finish 8th and walk up that hill arm in arm to the scoring tent, knowing that he had achieved a lifelong dream, and knowing that somehow I might have had a small part of that, and sharing in that. That was incredibly special. But working with tour players, as you know, it's not fun. It's rewarding. It's gratifying to know that these guys trust you like they have to, and to know that you've got not only their future but their family's future in your hands. That's so incredibly important. But the lessons for a lifetime, the beginning golfer, that you can make a difference. One of the greatest pressure that I've ever had as a golf instructor, my wife, we met late in life, and she had tried to take up golf several years ago, and the instructor she went to here in San Antonio told her after 15 minutes she never made contact with the ball. He told her that he'd love to take her money, but he just thought she'd probably be better off doing something else. And I can tell you that opens up a whole nother sore, because I can't imagine someone telling a beginning golfer that. So I finally, after about 2 years of dating, convinced her that, hey, I want to at least give this a shot and have you come out with me and at least see if you can hit a ball. And she wouldn't do it for the longest, but I finally talked her into it. So the pressure of that lesson, I had a little on the line there. We weren't married yet, so I had to perform. Okay.
That might have been your most pressure packed lesson.
Yeah. And, I made her clip tees just as Harvey would do. I taught her how to grip the club, and the previous instructor hadn't gotten her hands on the club. Well, she didn't see that third knuckle with the previous instructor, and I made her grip it properly. I taught her how to stand and hold the club. I taught her posture, alignment, ball position, etc. And then I made her hit a tee for probably 15 minutes until she could do it time and time again with her eyes closed. And the joy that I saw, the astonishment that I saw with Jill when that ball, the first ball that she swung at, went about 75 yards in the air with a pitching wedge. She couldn't believe it. It scared her almost because she'd never made contact with one. And you know what? We don't play golf when she and I go on trips and go on vacation. It's not her thing. But I'm proud to say in her very first tournament, she won closest to the pin, and she won a $100 gift certificate, a Visa card for closest to the pin. She hit it about 6 inches from the hole on a par 3 and almost
awesome.
made a hole-in-one in her first competitive round. So those are the things that to me are the lessons for a lifetime that I say.
You've been teaching 3-4 decades. It obviously have learned a lot and grown in that amount of time. Is there anything that the Bryan of today would tell the Bryan of, back in the mid 80s?
Well, going back to PGA West, I probably ought to have to go back and give all those poor people their money back because at that point in time we were doing 30-minute lessons and hour lessons, and I was at PGA West private courses and assistant pro, and I just quit playing for a living for 5 years. This was in the end of 1988, 89. I'd been at Oak Tree for a couple of years, and we didn't teach much up there. We just played golf with the members up there. But when I got to PGA West, we started teaching a bunch, and, not really having a lot of training and not having a lot of observation at that point in time. I had a pretty good idea about the golf swing and about teaching the game, but, it was my responsibility to tell them everything I knew in an hour's time, and the advice that I'd go back and give that guy right now and giving any young instructor, and I pride myself, I've got a gentleman named Scott House that's the director of instruction over at Westwood Country Club in Houston's a wonderful young instructor, and Scott does a great job, and I've mentored him, and one of the things that we talk about is, hey, it's okay not to say anything. Just sit there and be quiet and make what you say effective, and make sure you don't talk too much. And it's so incredibly important, in my opinion, as a young instructor, to learn to pick and choose and try to find the cause of the problem and not get too deep into the results early on. You really want to have a game plan as a coach. You want to know where you're going to be 3, 4, 6, 8 weeks down the line with that player. You don't need to try to get them there today. You need to make sure that you come up with a step-by-step systematic approach that's going to build and develop long-term success.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty good stuff. You want to do some rapid fire, and then
I'd love
get
to.
You out of here?
Absolutely.
All right. Let's see. The Ryder Cup seems to have their walk-up song now. So the song that they would play if you were on the Ryder Cup walking to the first tee.
Oh, we are the champions.
All right. If you had to buy stock in any golfer for the next 5 years, who would it be?
Ooh. One of my players or any player?
Anybody you want to.
One of my players, I'd buy some stock in Mac Meisner right now.
Okay. Well, given the fact that he's been winning and the record he's amassing, it might not be very the IPO on that one might be a little high. It's not a penny stock anymore.
No, it's not. And on the regular tour, I mean, how do you not like what Colin Morikawa has done out there in a short time? And Victor Hovland is going to win many events down the way as well. So those are some very special players. I love Matthew Wolff, but I think Colin Morikawa and Victor Hovland are really going to be long-term. That's going to be a blue chip buy on both of those guys.
All right. Let's see. Best course you ever played?
Casa de Campo, the Teeth of the Dog. Internationally, I think is the best. you got to go to Cypress Point here. I've been on some of the greatest courses in the world. I hadn't gotten to play Augusta or Pine Valley. I've been on a bunch of them, but the ones that I've personally played internationally, Teeth of the Dog, done by Pete Dye, an incredible golf course. And of course, what do you say about Cypress Point?
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable.
Let's see. With all the people that you know and come in contact with in your career, the biggest celebrity name in your phone?
George Strait.
That's a pretty big one.
That's a pretty good one.
I'd have to say. Let's see. If you could have anybody swing on any tour, who would it be?
You know, this is interesting because I had someone ask me this, a young guy that was interviewing me, Ben Wong, that plays at SMU, just recently started working with. And Ben kind of interviewed me, and he asked me to name my favorite swing. And I said Jim Furyk, and I think I heard dead stone silence on the other end for a while. And the reason that I say that is, name me a golf swing that has withstood the pressure better than his for the duration that it has. And the other two I would add to that, Lee Trevino for sure,
mm-hmm.
Had that kind of move. And Bruce Litsky had a move that for someone that didn't, Bruce worked at it hard when he played, but he didn't work at it when he didn't. And I knew Bruce quite well. And, you know, those swings that repeat themselves, what makes a great swing? Well, to me, what makes a great swing is being able to repeat it under pressure.
Yeah, I mean, you know where it's going to go. You know your tendencies.
Where it's going, what it's going to do.
Yeah, not to divert, but I got to ask you, since you know or knew Bruce, the story about his caddy putting the banana under the head cover.
Ask him personally, 100% true. And Brian Litsky, Bruce's brother, who caddied for him for a number of years on the Champions Tour, Brian actually, and Brian and Bruce have both passed away, unfortunately, far too soon. But Brian actually was one of my instructors with Mr. Penick when we started the Penick Academy. So, and I went to Lamar University, which was home. You know, Bruce was from the Beaumont area, and got to know Bruce quite well all through the years. And I asked Bruce point blank personally, so is the banana story true? And he chuckled. He says, unfortunately it is. For our listeners that don't know that, his caddy asked him what he wanted to do with his clubs at the end of the season, and he told him to just take him with him. He was going fishing and hunting. He wasn't going to practice during the off season. He'd meet him in Hawaii, but Bruce ended up taking the clubs with him. He said, no, you're taking them with you. You'll practice. And the caddy stuck a banana under his driver head cover. And Bruce said it was absolutely disgusting when they opened it up in Hawaii. It was horrible.
God. Oh, I couldn't even imagine. Let's see, a couple more here. Favorite sports movie?
Oh, favorite sports movie, Brian's Song. Go back to my football days. That one was because it was true and absolutely touching.
Last book that you read?
Oh, I've read a bunch. Probably, I've got to think of which one I read most recently. You know, I went back and reread a paperback that's long ago. I read it recently. I didn't read all the way through it, but I read a few chapters that were great. Were written by Raymond Floyd, How to Play Your Best When You're Not. And for anyone out there, it's phenomenal. He shares a story about visualization, and he was talking about putting, and for people that love the game of golf and got to watch Raymond play, no one was a more intense competitor than Ray Floyd. And Ray talked about the person writing the book with him. They asked him about visualization. He said, you know, when he was on the green, he would kind of visualize a locomotive going down the tracks into the hole on important putts and everything. And he said, well, the writer said, well, that doesn't seem that different. And interestingly, Raymond said, yeah, but when I'm in the zone, I can smell the smoke. So I like to go back and reread things like that. But I'm actually got a book that Brandel Chambly just came out with that I don't know what you're about promoting things on the air, but I'm looking forward. That's going to be my next read.
Yeah, I'm going to get some of his stuff. And Brand is an interesting person, very sharp.
Very much so, and a guy that I've spent a lot of time around, and actually a few years ago had the pleasure of working with a time or two on his short game. So always, I will share this, that something Noda told me about Brandel. He said the one thing you may or may not like whatever Brandel says, but he said, I can promise you no one has done their research and their homework more than Brandel Chambly.
I have said, and Brandel is who he is, and Bob Koepka was on the show, and we talked about the Koepka Chambly little. It wasn't even a feud. It was a little back and forth.
Right.
And Bob justified his position, and I wanted to give Bob his chance because obviously Brandel has the Golf Channel, and I have said more than once that I enjoy Brandel because he's not cookie cutter in the same way that Johnny Miller wasn't cookie cutter or Dick Vitale wasn't cookie cutter, and it's nice to see that as everything seems to be progressing more towards I don't say this in a bad way, but more of a corporate mold. That they're maybe they rub some people the wrong way, or they're a little polarizing, but they're definitely individual in a particular field, and it's nice to hear that.
I think it's great for not only from an entertainment perspective, but it's great to hear different opinions. That's how we learn.
Mm-hmm.
If we all have the same opinion, we all see and hear the same thing, we become robotic and nobody gets better. And what's wrong with challenging people? Right. Brandel spoke at last year's Top 100 Summit at Pinehurst, and he showed a drill that he and his current coach are kind of working on with the is with a stability ball. It's a turning
up against
drill.
The wall.
Yeah. And you know what? It's something that I'd use some different things. I'd put your hip against a wall and done it, but I'd never use a stability ball because you can get an XL one and you take a golf club and swing it back there. And well, I use it today. I mean, it's one of those things that you can learn from anyone. You don't have to all agree on everything to thank God we don't all agree on everything. It'd be a boring place to live.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, a couple more. Would you rather live 100 years in the past or in the future?
As much as I love where I've come from and everything, I'm so excited and anxious to see what's ahead. I tell my wife this. My wife tells people I'm the Energizer Bunny. She said, I'm not a lot older than her, but I'm a good bit older than her, I guess I should say. And she tells everyone how much energy I have and everything. I love getting up every day, going to work, going to see how I can make a difference and help someone, and not just their game, but the enjoyment of the game and where we're headed. And I would love to see where this game is. I hope and pray I get to see where it is 10 years from now, much less 100 years from now.
Mm-hmm. And then the last one, in your opinion, the greatest of all time for golf?
Jack Nicklaus to this point. And I'm lucky. I saw Jack and Tiger. I got to see Jack a number of times in person, watching him play, not obviously as a coach up front. Like I had the situation where I was working with Noda and we were side by side with Tiger on so many different occasions. But I'm not going to say that Tiger didn't play the best golf that's ever been played, but for the body of work, we still got to give Jack his due. He's, I'll tell you what I would have loved to have seen. I'd have loved to have seen them go head to head in their prime. And we'll share one quick story. I know we've got to go, but something that Rafael Alarcon that we talked about shared with me. It's kind of a tradition in Mexico that when Jack was younger, Rafael was the top individual male player when he was young before college. Mm-hmm. And he got to play an exhibition match with Jack. One of the big corporations down there would bring Jack down each year to play an exhibition match. And Raphael said he'll never forget the first time he met on the first tee when he met Nicklaus. And he said, Jack just looked into his soul in his eyes and didn't blink, didn't look away, and said it made him uncomfortable, and said he finally turned his head and looked away. Well, fast forward many years, when Lorena was just prior to her turning pro, she got to play as an amateur with Jack and David Duvall and Annika Sorenstam in an exhibition match down there. And Raphael remembered that, and he prepared Lorena for that meeting. She said, when you meet Jack, and I had the good fortune to meet Lorena and spend a great deal of time with she and Raphael together down at Guadalajara Country Club when she was still competing and playing, and Raphael and I shared videos and talked about her for years and years. But he had prepared her for that meeting, and he told her, no matter what you do, don't blink and don't look away. And Raphael was there for this exhibition, and said when they introduced themselves, they both stared into each other's soul through their eyes, and said he genuinely believed that Jack finally realized that she had been coached on this, and he didn't want to make her uncomfortable in that regard. But he said it must have been like a minute. He said it seemed like an eternity. And finally Jack looked away, and Lorena, she was very proud of that when they shared that story with me. But interestingly, the respect that was created there, she and Jack actually became very close and very good friends after that.
That's pretty cool. What do you have coming up? I mean, you obviously have your schools. Do you have any? Are you lecturing anywhere?
I've got it's right in the heart of the season for my players right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've got all the college golf's about to crank up. The Mac is leaving. He just got back from the Jones Cup. He didn't have a good tournament. We've got a little bit of work to do, FaceTime on his swing this week. I was on the phone with Johnny Kiefer earlier at Baylor. They're getting ready to play in the All-American with all the big schools, and they're very, very good this year. They're going to be a contender for, in my opinion. Not only they won the Big 12 match play in the fall, and Johnny played wonderfully there, but they're right there with UT, with Oklahoma State, Oklahoma. They're all good this year. There's great golf being played in the Big 12. So I've got my work cut out with that. And then I'm proud to say this summer, mentioning George Goich, Raphael Alarcon, my son Hunter Gathright, and I are actually going up for a week end of May to Flossmoor in Chicago, and actually doing a week-long mix of programs and lessons and fitness. And my son has a training aid that they just recently got a patent on called True Speed Golf, and we're really excited about the progress they've made with that. It's a overspeed, underspeed training program, and I'm enjoying seeing that grow, and I'm really excited to get to teach golf at a place where is owned by George and his brother, and dear friends that they are and have been for years, and then to get to teach side by side with someone like Raphael that I respect, and then to say that I'm going to get to teach side by side with my son, that's a really special time I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, it'd be very gratifying for sure. If somebody wanted to reach out to you for a lesson or teach a school corporate outing, how can they get a hold of you?
The easiest way, you can you can either call, or you can go on my website and connect through there, and it's www.BryanGathright golf.com, or you can reach me. I'm pretty easy to find if you Google me. I'm at the Clubs of Cordillera Ranch in Boerne, Texas, which is just outside San Antonio, and I'm happy to say I would love to do that at any point in time. It's something we do quite a bit of, and I'd love for, always look forward to making new friends and pupils, to borrow a phrase from Harvey, and certainly the opportunity that you've given me to share some of those stories tonight, Pete. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed our conversation, our time, and hopefully we'll get to meet in person here sometime soon.
I hope so. Maybe up at Flossmoor, because George told me they're having a couple pro members, and he told me I got to come up there and see the whole thing. So I'm that will happen. I just don't know when this year.
Well, hopefully it'd be sometime in May. We can get together and play.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
It'd be fun as well.
Are you on social media? Can people follow you there?
Yes, absolutely. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I would love to tell you I have a Twitter account. I'm not the most active on Twitter, but I stay so busy teaching all my players. I'm probably not as active as a lot of the guys on social media. I try to make them play as well as they can play, and let them kind of speak for me in that regard.
Yeah, and I'll have all those links in the summary, and anybody can click on it, and your contact information will be there. So people should reach out to you with your history and what you know, who you work with, and you're obviously extremely good at what you do. I'd highly recommend anybody, whether you're in the Texas area or not, to check you out.
Well, thank you so much, Pete. I'm fortunate I've got a lot of people from a lot of different places, both inside and outside the U.S., and I'm just thankful every day to get up and get a chance to do what I get to do. And I've managed to get to be 62 years of age and really never had a real job. So I can't complain. I'm one of the lucky ones.
You know, the only regret I have looking back was back in the mid '90s when Mr. Penick's book had come out, or shortly thereafter, and I was working here. I had considered writing to him and driving to Austin to say, just can I come out and watch you teach for an hour or a day or a couple days? But I was just a punky 21-year-old kid, and driving halfway across country was a pretty big thing. And then I thought, well, gosh, he's this big icon. He either won't answer or it's not worth my time. And I regret that ever since. And, you know, I would have gotten to meet you a lot sooner.
I assure you of one thing as well. He would have answered. He would have talked your ear off, much like I have tonight, and you would have had a friend for life, I can assure you, because he never met a stranger, and he never, ever turned anyone away. And one of the things that was so difficult, they did not want him to – I can't tell you how many thousand books that he wrote, and he would not only not just sign Harvey Penick in the books, he would always – either put "Take Dead Aim" or "To My Friend and Pupil" or something. There was always a little bit of something in those books, and he autographed literally thousands and thousands and thousands of books. He just never would tell anyone no.
Is that still the top-selling golf book, instruction book of all time?
I haven't seen recent. I know it's the top-selling golf book of all time.
Mm-hmm.
At one point in time, it was the top-selling sports book worldwide of all time, and I don't know if it still is, but back in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was the number one selling sports book worldwide of all time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he was wise well beyond his years, and so far ahead of his time. I thank God every day for the interest he took in me as a coach, as a person, and just hopefully making me a little better than I was before. And what an opportunity.
Well, I think people are going to hear that loud and clear once they listen to this. This has been awesome, Bryan. I can't wait to meet you in person and talk some more and have a meal or two and a few beers as well.
I look forward to it, Pete, and I'll send you all the info as well, as far as how to reach me. Thank you so much for your time, and what a pleasure it is to be on with you and to share all these stories. Thank you for giving me the opportunity and the platform to do that.
It's been awesome. You have a wonderful night.
You too, sir. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you enjoyed it, you can find more information on today's episode and other topics at golf360.blog. There you'll find the show notes and links related to this episode, as well as any other episode that we've done so far to date. If you're interested in improving your game and would like to learn more from yours truly by taking a private lesson, a half-day or multi-day school, club or putter fitting, you can reach me through the blog site or by email, pete@golf360.blog. So some of you may be asking, what is the golf paradigm? All you have to do is click on the homepage while on my blog site to discover how you can start playing better than you ever thought possible. Or you can simply sign up, again, on the blog page for my instructional videos where I give regular tips on all areas of the game to include the swing, club design and fitting, health, fitness and nutrition, the mental aspects, and equally as important, the integration of all those things together. I'm also on social media, and you can find me at The Golf Paradigm. That's Paradigm, and I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, also under the same name, The Golf Paradigm. Facebook is usually the best way to reach me for questions and or comments, and I look forward to hearing what all of you have to say. This podcast is brought to you in part by Old South Golf Links. A short ride across a bridge from Hilton Head Island is one of the area's finest golf courses and a hidden treasure. Set up on towering pines and ancient oaks with sweeping marsh vistas, truly makes Old South Golf Links a one-of-a-kind golfing experience. The Clyde Johnson design was named one of the top 10 new public courses when it opened, and it also takes full advantage of the natural beauty of the Low Country. Old South is a fun and unique challenge for golfers of every skill level and a favorite of both locals and visitors. Whether it's your first time here or you're a regular, you'll be treated and feel like family. From the bag drop to check-in at the fully stocked pro shop with both men's and women's apparel, to breakfast or lunch before or after your round, the staff is always ready and willing to help. Experience for yourself why Old South is one of the premier golf courses in the Hilton Head area and why it will quickly become a favorite of yours too. Visit them in person or online at www.oldsouthgolf.com, or to make it tee time, simply call the pro shop at 843-785-5353.